You've been resisting reality your entire life, and no one ever told you that this is where your exhaustion comes from. They told you to stay strong, to push harder, to never accept things as they are. But if fighting reality worked, why do you still feel drained even when nothing is happening? Why does your mind keep searching for problems even in moments of peace? The truth is, reality isn't your enemy, and the moment you stop resisting it, something inside you finally unclenches. Most suffering isn't caused by events. It's caused by the quiet argument in your head, the refusal to accept what already exists, the constant need for life to be different before you allow yourself to be calm. But Buddhist teachings explain that peace begins the second you stop negotiating with what is. Not by giving up on life, but by ending the war with it. And when that war ends, your energy returns, your thoughts slow down, and the heaviness you carried for years starts dissolving without force. Tonight, as you listen, you'll begin to notice a shift. The tension in your body will soften. The need to control everything will loosen. The fear of what might happen will fade into the background. You'll discover a calm that doesn't come from fixing life, but from finally allowing it. And when you wake up tomorrow, the world will look the same, but you will feel different. Lighter, clearer, no longer fighting every moment. This isn't just another explanation to hear and forget. This is what happens when you stop resisting reality and start living inside it. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something begins to shift the moment you stop asking life to be different before you allow yourself to breathe. The noise doesn't disappear all at once, but it loses its authority. What once felt unbearable starts to feel distant, as if the storm is still happening somewhere, just no longer inside you. Up to this point, the weight you carried came from resistance, from the silent fight against what already happened, what is already true, what refuses to bend to your preferences. Now, the deeper change begins, not by controlling reality, but by ending the war with it. Suffering has a strange way of disguising itself as responsibility. It tells you that if you keep thinking, keep replaying, keep analyzing, you might somehow undo what cannot be undone. The mind becomes a courtroom where the past is retried every day, hoping for a different verdict. But the verdict never changes. The event remains. The loss remains. The mistake remains. And the exhaustion grows not because of what happened, but because of the endless argument with what cannot be revised. When the mind finally stops objecting to facts, something unexpected happens. The pain that felt sharp begins to soften at the edges. Not because the situation improved, not because answers suddenly appeared, but because the resistance that amplified the pain is no longer feeding it. It becomes clear that a large portion of suffering was never in the event itself. It lived in the sentence, "This shouldn't be happening." That sentence is heavy. It carries frustration, helplessness, and quiet rage. It is the voice of a mind that refuses to accept limits. Yet reality has always operated on its own terms. It does not consult preferences. It does not negotiate with expectations. It simply unfolds. Fighting it is like trying to stop the ocean with your hands. The effort is real, but the result is exhaustion. Acceptance does not mean liking what happened. It does not mean approving of pain or pretending loss is fair. It simply means recognizing that the event has already occurred and cannot be reversed by mental protest. This recognition frees enormous energy that was previously trapped in resistance. Energy that can now be used for healing instead of fighting. There is a quiet relief in no longer having to rewrite reality. The body feels it first. Shoulders drop. Breathing deepens. The constant tension in the jaw releases. These physical changes happen because the nervous system is no longer preparing for a battle that cannot be won. It finally understands there is nothing to defend against. Many people fear that without resistance, they will become passive or weak. The opposite happens. When you stop wasting strength on denial, you have more strength available for meaningful action. Clarity replaces confusion. You begin to see what can actually be changed and what must simply be carried with grace. The war with what is often begins in childhood, when the mind learns that discomfort should be avoided at all costs. Over time, this becomes a habit of rejecting any experience that feels unpleasant. But life includes loss, uncertainty, aging, disappointment, and endings. Refusing to accept these realities turns every natural difficulty into a personal crisis. When acceptance enters, difficulties remain, but the crisis disappears. The experience becomes part of life, rather than a violation of it. This shift is subtle but profound. It is the difference between drowning and floating. The water is still there, but the relationship to it has changed. There is also a deeper understanding that emerges. Reality was never the source of suffering. Resistance was. Two people can face the same situation, illness, failure, rejection, and experience it differently depending on whether they are fighting it or allowing it. The one who fights carries anger and despair. The one who allows carries sadness but also peace. Sadness passes. Despair lingers. Allowing reality does not remove responsibility. It removes illusion. It clears the mind so decisions are made from truth rather than panic. You respond instead of react. You adapt instead of collapse. You move forward instead of staying trapped in the moment that hurt you. Something else fades when the war ends: the need to blame. Blame keeps the conflict alive by insisting someone or something must be held responsible for the pain. But once acceptance takes hold, blame loses its purpose. You no longer need a villain to justify your suffering. You simply acknowledge that life contains events beyond personal control. This acknowledgement brings humility, but also freedom. You stop measuring yourself against impossible standards of control. You stop believing that every outcome reflects your worth. Some things happen because conditions align in ways no individual could manage. Seeing this clearly removes the burden of carrying the universe on your shoulders. Time also begins to feel different. When resistance is active, time moves slowly because the mind is stuck replaying the same objections. When acceptance appears, time opens. Moments pass without dragging. The present becomes livable again because it is no longer compared to a past that cannot return. Relationships improve as well. Resistance often spills onto others in the form of irritability, withdrawal, or silent resentment. When inner conflict softens, patience returns. You listen more. You speak more gently. You stop expecting others to compensate for the peace you are withholding from yourself. There is a quiet dignity in accepting reality. It does not seek attention. It does not announce itself. It simply shows in the way a person moves through life without constant agitation. They still feel pain, but they are not defined by it. They still encounter difficulty, but they are not shattered by it. Eventually, acceptance becomes natural. The mind learns that arguing with facts only prolongs suffering. It begins to release resistance more quickly. Situations that once caused days of turmoil pass through in hours. Emotional recovery shortens because the energy of denial is no longer involved. The end of the war with what is also reveals a deeper peace that was always present beneath the noise. This peace does not depend on circumstances. It does not disappear when life becomes difficult. It remains steady because it is rooted in alignment with reality rather than escape from it. You start to trust yourself more, not because you believe you can control everything, but because you know you can face whatever comes without collapsing into resistance. This trust becomes a quiet form of confidence. It does not need to prove itself, it simply exists. There is also gratitude that emerges unexpectedly, not gratitude for the pain itself, but for the clarity that followed. You see how much energy was lost fighting battles that never needed to be fought. You see how much of life was missed while trying to force it into a different shape. From this perspective, even ordinary moments feel meaningful. A quiet morning, a simple conversation, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, these become enough. Not because life became extraordinary, but because the mind stopped rejecting what was already here. Peace, then, is not something added to life. It is what remains when resistance is removed. It was always present, waiting behind the arguments, behind the expectations, behind the refusal to accept change. And once you experience this peace, you understand something that cannot be explained but only felt. Reality was never your enemy. It was the ground beneath your feet the entire time. The struggle came from trying to stand somewhere else. When the war ends, life does not suddenly become perfect. It becomes real. And in that reality, there is space to breathe, to heal, and to live without constantly bracing for impact. The mind, once obsessed with changing the past or securing the future, settles into the only place where life actually unfolds. Now. And in this quiet, unforced presence, suffering loses its grip, not through effort, but through understanding. The battle is over not because you won, but because you stopped fighting something that was never against you. When the fight with reality ends, a strange silence takes its place. At first it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because the mind was so used to tension that calm feels like vulnerability. But inside that quiet, something begins to sharpen. You start noticing details you were too agitated to see before. You respond instead of react. You move with intention instead of desperation. This is where a deeper truth reveals itself. Acceptance was never weakness. It was clarity waiting for space to appear. Something shifts the moment you stop confusing acceptance with surrender. The fear was always that if you accepted reality, you would become passive, soft, incapable of protecting yourself. But what actually disappears is not your strength. It is the distortion that prevented you from using it wisely. Resistance clouds perception. It fills the mind with noise, assumptions, and emotional static. Acceptance clears the lens. It allows you to see situations as they are, not as your fear or frustration paints them. When perception becomes clear, action becomes precise. You stop wasting energy solving problems that only exist in imagination. You stop reacting to tone instead of meaning, to symbols instead of substance. Many conflicts escalate because people are responding to what they think is happening rather than what is actually happening. Acceptance anchors you in reality, and reality provides accurate information. There is also a quiet patience that emerges, not the forced patience of someone trying to appear calm, but a natural steadiness that comes from understanding that rushing does not produce better outcomes. Without resistance, urgency loses its grip. You still act, but you act at the right moment, with the right amount of force, in the right direction. This is precision, not doing less, but doing exactly what is needed and nothing more. Emotional reactions become more measured. Instead of immediate anger, there is a pause where understanding can enter. Instead of panic, there is observation. This pause is powerful because it prevents mistakes made in emotional blindness. Many regrets come from actions taken while the mind was overwhelmed. Acceptance protects against this by stabilizing awareness before action begins. You also become harder to manipulate. When you are not fighting reality, you are not desperate for control or validation. Desperation makes people predictable. It pushes them into choices that relieve discomfort quickly but create long-term consequences. Acceptance removes that urgency, allowing decisions to be guided by long-term clarity rather than short-term relief. There is a practical intelligence in acceptance that people rarely recognize. It acknowledges limits. It recognizes when effort is useful and when effort is wasteful. Pushing against something immovable only drains strength needed elsewhere. By seeing where change is possible and where it is not, you direct your energy efficiently. Relationships benefit from this precision as well. You stop trying to force others to be different before you can interact peacefully. You listen more carefully because you are not waiting for your turn to correct or defend. Communication becomes cleaner because it is not filtered through resistance. Misunderstandings decrease because assumptions are replaced with attention. Acceptance also reveals opportunities that resistance hides. When you are fixated on what should have happened, you overlook what is still available. Doors that remain open are ignored because attention is locked on the one that closed. Acceptance widens awareness, allowing you to see paths that were invisible when you were stuck in disappointment. There is also a deeper sense of self-trust that develops. You learn that calm observation often leads to better outcomes than frantic intervention. You trust your ability to navigate complexity without forcing premature solutions. This trust reduces anxiety because you no longer feel that everything depends on immediate control. Your body reflects this shift. Movements become slower but more deliberate. Speech becomes measured. Even your posture changes because tension is no longer driving every action. People may interpret this as confidence, but it is actually the absence of inner conflict. Acceptance does not remove ambition or effort, it refines them. You still pursue goals, but you do so without tying your identity to the outcome. This makes failure less devastating and success less intoxicating. Both become information rather than definitions of your worth. Creativity also expands. A mind trapped in resistance repeats familiar patterns because it is trying to escape discomfort quickly. A mind grounded in acceptance explores possibilities because it is not afraid of uncertainty. Solutions appear that would never surface in a state of panic. Decision-making improves because fear is no longer steering. You evaluate risks realistically instead of exaggerating them. You consider consequences without catastrophizing. Choices become aligned with values rather than reactions to pressure. There is a quiet courage in acting from acceptance. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not need recognition. It simply moves forward without hesitation because it is not burdened by internal conflict. This courage is sustainable because it is not fueled by anger or pride, which eventually burn out. Over time, you notice that problems resolve more smoothly when approached from acceptance. Not because life becomes easier, but because your approach becomes effective. You stop creating secondary problems through impulsive reactions. One difficulty remains one difficulty instead of multiplying into many. You also become more present during action. Resistance often splits attention between what is happening and what you wish were happening. Acceptance unifies attention. All awareness is directed toward the task at hand. This increases performance in everything from conversations to complex work. There is a sense of alignment that replaces inner friction. Thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction instead of pulling against each other. This alignment conserves energy and reduces exhaustion. You feel less drained at the end of the day because you were not fighting yourself while interacting with the world. Mistakes are handled differently too. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism, you assess what happened, adjust, and continue. Learning becomes faster because energy is not wasted on shame. Improvement becomes steady rather than erratic. Acceptance also sharpens moral clarity. When emotions are not distorting perception, you see the impact of your actions more clearly. You recognize when firmness is needed and when compassion is appropriate. You respond to the situation instead of applying rigid rules that ignore context. There is a calm authority in someone who acts from acceptance. Others feel it even if they cannot explain it. It comes from consistency. You are not unpredictable because you are not driven by fluctuating emotions. People know where you stand because your responses are grounded in reality rather than mood. Even in crisis, acceptance allows effective action. Panic narrows vision and reduces options. Acceptance expands vision and reveals possibilities. It keeps the mind functional under pressure, which is often the difference between escalation and resolution. Eventually, acceptance becomes a form of quiet mastery. You navigate life with minimal resistance, minimal wasted motion, minimal unnecessary conflict. Your actions are guided by what is true rather than what is preferred. This alignment creates a life that feels steady even when circumstances change. And perhaps the most surprising discovery is that acceptance does not make life smaller. It makes it more precise, more intentional, more alive. You experience events directly instead of through layers of expectation and fear. Each moment becomes clearer because nothing is being mentally edited. What once felt like giving up reveals itself as gaining clarity. What once seemed like weakness reveals itself as disciplined awareness. Acceptance does not remove your ability to act. It removes the confusion that prevented you from acting wisely. The quiet that replaced the war with reality now becomes a source of intelligence. It guides you toward actions that are proportionate, timely, and effective. You no longer swing blindly at problems. You address them with accuracy. And in that accuracy, you find a new kind of strength, one that does not depend on resistance, one that does not exhaust itself, one that works with reality instead of against it. As acceptance sharpened your perception, it also exposed something deeper that had been hiding beneath the surface. The quiet belief that control is the only thing keeping you safe. You started acting with clarity, but you also began to notice how much of your tension came from trying to manage everything, predict everything, secure every outcome before it even arrived. The precision you gained revealed the weight you had been carrying for years without questioning it. A subtle fear begins to loosen when you realize how much of your life was organized around preventing uncertainty. Plans stacked on plans, backup plans for the backup plans, constant checking, constant adjusting, constant scanning for what could go wrong. It felt responsible, it felt mature, it even felt necessary. But underneath it was a silent anxiety whispering that if you stopped controlling things, everything would collapse. Something unsettling but freeing appears when control starts slipping from your grip and the disaster you expected does not happen. Life continues moving. People adapt. Situations resolve themselves in ways you could not have designed. The mind struggles at first because it built its identity around being the one who manages everything. Without that role, there is a sense of exposure, like standing without armor in a world that suddenly feels unpredictable. Control promises safety, but it delivers tension. It keeps the body in a state of alertness, as if danger is always one step away. The nervous system never fully rests because it believes vigilance is survival. When you loosen control, the body finally experiences moments of genuine ease, not because problems disappeared, but because the constant scanning stopped. You begin to notice how many of your decisions were driven by the need to avoid discomfort rather than the desire to live fully. Choices were filtered through fear of loss, fear of embarrassment, fear of uncertainty. Letting go of control removes that filter. Decisions become aligned with what matters instead of what feels safest in the moment. There is a different kind of security that emerges, one that does not depend on controlling circumstances. It comes from adaptability, from knowing that whatever happens, you can respond without breaking. This security is stable because it is internal. It does not fluctuate with external conditions. The illusion of control also distorts relationships. Trying to manage how others think, feel, or behave creates friction that slowly erodes connection. When control loosens, people feel less pressure, less resistance, more space to be themselves. Paradoxically, this often leads to deeper trust, because the relationship is no longer a negotiation for safety. You start to see how control was often an attempt to eliminate vulnerability. If everything is predictable, nothing can surprise you. If nothing can surprise you, nothing can hurt you. But life's richness comes from unpredictability, from moments that were never planned, from conversations that shift direction, from opportunities that appear without warning. Letting go does not mean becoming careless. It means recognizing the boundary between influence and dominance. You can prepare without obsessing. You can plan without attaching your peace to the plan's success. You can act responsibly without believing you are responsible for everything. There is relief in admitting that some outcomes were never yours to manage. Weather changes, markets shift, people evolve, bodies age, time moves forward regardless of personal preference. Fighting these realities drains energy that could be used for meaningful living. Accepting them redirects energy toward what is actually within reach. You also begin to see that control anxiety often disguises itself as perfectionism. The need for everything to be just right before you relax. The belief that one mistake could unravel everything. Letting go reveals that imperfection is not a threat. It is the normal state of existence. Unexpected resilience surfaces when you stop trying to prevent every possible difficulty. Challenges still arrive, but they no longer feel catastrophic. You meet them with curiosity instead of panic. You learn that discomfort is survivable, that uncertainty is navigable, that not knowing is not the same as being lost. There is also a shift in how you experience time. Control keeps you trapped in the future, constantly preparing for what might happen. Letting go returns you to the present, where life is actually unfolding. You notice details you missed before, the tone of a voice, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet between sounds. The mind becomes quieter because it no longer needs to simulate every possible scenario. This quiet is not emptiness, it is spaciousness, a state where thoughts appear and disappear without demanding immediate action. Decisions arise from clarity rather than urgency. Trust replaces tension, not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in your ability to face whatever comes. This trust is earned through experience. Each time you release control and discover that you can handle what follows, confidence deepens. It becomes clear that security was never about preventing change, but about remaining steady within it. Fear loses some of its authority because it can no longer use uncertainty as a weapon. You realize that uncertainty was always present, even when you thought you were in control. Plans gave the illusion of stability, but reality was always fluid beneath them. There is also a newfound respect for the intelligence of life itself. Situations often resolve through a complex web of factors no individual could coordinate. Letting go allows these processes to unfold without interference. You participate rather than dominate. Your priorities shift. Instead of investing all your energy into controlling outcomes, you invest in developing qualities that remain valuable regardless of outcome. Patience, awareness, compassion, resilience. These qualities form a stable foundation that external changes cannot easily shake. The need to constantly prove competence fades. You no longer equate worth with the ability to manage everything. You allow yourself to be human, to not know, to learn as you go. This humility opens space for growth because you are no longer pretending to have complete control. Even success feels different. It becomes less about conquering uncertainty and more about navigating it gracefully. You appreciate achievements without clinging to them as proof of safety. You recognize that conditions can change, and that is not a failure, just the nature of existence. Moments of stillness become more frequent, not forced stillness, but natural pauses where nothing needs to be fixed or managed. In these pauses, there is a sense of quiet contentment that was previously drowned out by constant planning. The body mirrors this shift. Sleep improves because the mind is not rehearsing tomorrow's threats. Muscles relax because they are no longer bracing for impact. Breathing deepens because the system no longer interprets uncertainty as immediate danger. You also notice how much creativity was suppressed by the need for certainty. Innovation requires openness to the unknown. When control loosens, new ideas surface because the mind is willing to explore without guarantees. Freedom emerges in subtle ways. You take risks that align with your values instead of avoiding them out of fear. You allow experiences to unfold without scripting every detail. You engage with life as a participant rather than a manager. There is gratitude for unpredictability, not because it is always pleasant, but because it keeps life dynamic. It prevents stagnation. It invites growth. It reminds you that existence is not a machine to be operated, but a process to be lived. The deeper security that replaces control anxiety is quiet and steady. It does not announce itself. It does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. It simply exists as a calm confidence that whatever happens, you will remain present, responsive, and grounded. And in that grounded presence, you discover that safety was never found in controlling the world. It was found in no longer needing to. As the grip of control loosened, something else quietly revealed itself, the realization that not all pain was coming from life itself. Some of it was being produced inside, repeated, amplified, stretched across days, months, even years. You began to notice how one difficult moment could echo endlessly, not because it was still happening, but because the mind kept reopening it. Letting go of control created space to see this pattern clearly, and in that clarity, another shift became possible. There comes a point when you realize the pain you feel now is not always from the original wound, but from the constant touching of it. Like pressing on a bruise to check if it still hurts, the mind returns to the same memory, the same thought, the same question, reopening what could have been allowed to heal. The discomfort was real, but the repetition made it permanent. Something softens when you stop feeding the echo. The event remains in the past, where it belongs, instead of being dragged into the present again and again. You start to feel the difference between pain that arrives naturally and pain that is recreated by memory and resistance. One fades with time, the other grows stronger because it is rehearsed. Resistance has a multiplying effect. It turns a single experience into a narrative about your life, your identity, your future. A loss becomes proof that nothing lasts. A mistake becomes proof that you are inadequate. A rejection becomes proof that you are unworthy. The mind builds layers around the original event until the layers weigh more than the event itself. When resistance drops, those layers begin to fall away. You see that the story was heavier than the fact. Without the story, the experience becomes simpler. It hurts, but it no longer defines everything. It becomes one chapter instead of the entire book. There is relief in allowing pain to exist without trying to erase it. Fighting discomfort often prolongs it because the fight keeps attention locked on the sensation. Allowing it to be present without commentary lets it move through naturally. Emotions are designed to flow, not to be trapped under constant analysis. You also notice how resistance adds urgency. The feeling that something must be fixed immediately, that discomfort is unacceptable, that peace can only return when the situation changes. This urgency intensifies suffering because it creates pressure on top of pain. When urgency dissolves, patience appears. The body understands that it is allowed to process at its own pace. Memories lose their sharpness when they are no longer treated as threats. The nervous system stops reacting as if the past is happening again. What once triggered panic becomes a quiet recollection. The emotional charge fades because the mind is no longer interpreting it as danger. There is a deeper understanding that pain itself is not the enemy. It is information. It signals loss, change, vulnerability, love, attachment, all parts of being human. Resistance transforms this information into punishment. Acceptance transforms it into experience. You start to see how much of long-term suffering comes from the question that never finds an answer. Why did this happen? Why did they do that? Why didn't things turn out differently? These questions keep the mind circling without resolution. When you stop demanding answers, the mind rests. Not because it understands everything, but because it no longer needs to. Physical sensations change too. Emotional pain often manifests as tightness in the chest, heaviness in the stomach, tension in the muscles. When resistance fades, these sensations loosen. The body releases what it was holding in preparation for a threat that no longer exists. Compassion for yourself begins to replace criticism. Instead of judging yourself for still hurting, you recognize that healing has its own rhythm. This compassion prevents secondary suffering, the pain of feeling pain. You allow yourself to be human without treating it as failure. Time regains its healing function. Resistance freezes you in the moment of impact, preventing movement forward. Acceptance allows time to do what it naturally does: create distance. With distance comes perspective. With perspective comes understanding. You also become less afraid of future pain. When you see that discomfort can pass without destroying you, fear loses some of its authority. You trust your ability to recover, to adapt, to continue living even after difficult experiences. Relationships improve because you stop projecting unresolved pain onto others. Instead of reacting to them as if they were responsible for past wounds, you respond to who they are in the present. This reduces unnecessary conflict and deepens connection. There is also freedom from the need to numb yourself. Many people distract, overwork, overconsume, or withdraw to escape discomfort. When resistance ends, these escapes become less necessary because the pain is no longer overwhelming. You can sit with it without being consumed by it. Creativity returns because mental space opens. The energy once used to maintain suffering becomes available for building something new. You start thinking about possibilities instead of replaying what cannot be changed. Grief transforms as well. Instead of being a permanent shadow, it becomes a quiet presence that visits but does not dominate. You remember without collapsing. You feel without being swallowed. There is a moment when you realize you have gone hours, maybe even days, without thinking about what once occupied your mind constantly, not because you forced yourself to forget, but because it no longer demands attention. Life quietly expands beyond the wound. You also become more present for others' pain. Having learned how suffering multiplies, you recognize the importance of simply being there instead of trying to fix everything. You listen without rushing. You understand without imposing solutions. Peace begins to feel natural instead of fragile. It is no longer dependent on everything going well. It coexists with uncertainty, with imperfection, with the possibility of future pain. This makes it durable. There is gratitude for the capacity to feel deeply, even when it hurts. Pain reveals what matters. It shows where love existed, where expectations lived, where attachment formed. Without resistance, this revelation becomes meaningful instead of overwhelming. Eventually, pain loses its ability to define your identity. You are not the person who was hurt. You are the person who experienced hurt and continued. This distinction restores a sense of self that is not bound to suffering. You begin to trust that emotions have an endpoint when they are not resisted. Like waves, they rise and fall. Trying to hold them in place prolongs the storm. Letting them move allows calm to return on its own. Silence becomes comforting instead of threatening because it is no longer filled with intrusive thoughts. The mind rests between experiences instead of replaying them. In that rest, you rediscover parts of yourself that were overshadowed by pain. Life feels lighter, not because nothing difficult ever happened, but because you are no longer carrying everything at once. You carry what is present, and you set down what has passed. The moment pain stops multiplying itself is not dramatic. There is no announcement, no clear boundary between before and after. It is recognized in small ways: a deeper breath, a quieter mind, a day that feels manageable again. And in that quiet, you understand something profound. Pain was never meant to stay forever. It stayed because resistance held it in place. When the grip loosens, it moves on, leaving behind wisdom, strength, and a softer way of being in the world. From here, life continues, not without difficulty, but without the endless echo that once made every difficulty feel permanent. As pain stopped multiplying itself, a quiet space opened where constant mental noise used to live. In that space, another pattern became visible: the endless need to understand everything before allowing yourself to relax. You noticed how often the mind demanded explanations, reasons, conclusions, as if calm was something that had to be earned through clarity. Without answers, it stayed restless, scanning, searching, refusing to settle. But the absence of explanation did not destroy you. It simply revealed how much energy had been spent trying to make life logically complete before permitting yourself to feel at peace. There is a subtle tension in needing life to make sense first. It keeps the mind in investigation mode, replaying events, connecting dots, trying to extract meaning from experiences that may never offer one. This effort feels productive, but it often delays healing. The nervous system remains alert because it believes resolution is required before rest is allowed. When that requirement dissolves, rest arrives on its own. Confusion loses its threat when you stop treating it as a problem to solve immediately. Not everything that happens carries a clear lesson. Some events are simply intersections of timing, circumstance, and chance. Accepting this uncertainty removes the pressure to decode every moment. Life becomes something to experience rather than something to analyze endlessly. There is relief in admitting that understanding is not a prerequisite for calm. You can sit in a quiet room without knowing how everything will unfold. You can breathe without resolving every unanswered question. This relief feels unfamiliar at first, like stepping outside without armor, but it quickly becomes liberating because the mind is no longer trapped in a loop of interpretation. Meaning often appears naturally when you stop forcing it. Insights surface during ordinary moments: walking, washing dishes, listening to rain, not during intense mental interrogation. By releasing the demand for immediate clarity, you allow understanding to emerge organically, shaped by time rather than pressure. You begin to notice how the search for meaning sometimes masks a deeper discomfort with uncertainty. The mind prefers a painful explanation over no explanation at all because certainty feels safer than the unknown. Letting go of this preference expands your tolerance for ambiguity. You become comfortable not knowing, which paradoxically makes you more adaptable to whatever comes. Relationships feel lighter too. You stop trying to decipher every word, every silence, every shift in behavior. Instead of assuming hidden motives, you respond to what is actually present. This reduces unnecessary misunderstandings created by overinterpretation. There is also a shift in how you view your own past. Events that once demanded explanation no longer hold the same urgency. You may never fully understand why certain things happened, and that realization no longer disturbs you. The past becomes quieter because it is not constantly being examined under a microscope. Peace begins to feel independent of circumstances. It is no longer postponed until life aligns perfectly. It exists alongside unanswered questions, alongside incomplete stories, alongside uncertainty about the future. This kind of peace is stable because it is not conditional. You discover that the need for everything to make sense was another form of control. It was an attempt to impose order on a reality that operates through complexity. Letting go of that need allows you to engage with life as it is, rather than as you wish it would be. Creativity deepens in this openness. Without rigid expectations about meaning, you become receptive to new perspectives. You explore possibilities without insisting they fit a predetermined narrative. Ideas connect in unexpected ways because the mind is no longer filtering them through the need for coherence. Decision-making becomes more intuitive. Instead of waiting for perfect clarity, you act based on what feels aligned in the present moment. You trust your ability to adjust as new information appears. This flexibility replaces the paralysis that comes from waiting for certainty. Time feels less oppressive. When you no longer believe every moment must lead somewhere meaningful, you can appreciate experiences for what they are. A quiet afternoon, a simple meal, a conversation that goes nowhere, these become sufficient without needing to justify their value. There is humility in accepting that life is larger than your understanding of it. This humility removes the burden of trying to master existence intellectually. You participate instead of dominating, observe instead of dissecting. You also become less judgmental toward others. Recognizing that not everything has a clear reason makes you more compassionate toward behaviors you once tried to categorize quickly. You allow complexity in people because you have allowed it in life itself. Anxiety decreases because the future is no longer treated as a puzzle that must be solved in advance. You prepare where you can and release what you cannot foresee. This balance creates a steady confidence that is not shaken by unpredictability. Gratitude emerges in unexpected ways. Without the pressure to extract meaning, you begin to appreciate experiences simply because they occurred. Moments are valued for their presence rather than their purpose. You start to trust silence. Silence without answers, silence without conclusions, silence that simply exists without explanation. This silence becomes restorative because it is free from mental effort. There is also a shift in identity. You stop defining yourself by the narratives you constructed to make sense of your life. You are not limited to the story you told to understand your experiences. You are free to evolve beyond it. Peace reveals itself as something simple, almost ordinary. It was hidden behind the belief that calm required resolution. When that belief dissolves, calm becomes accessible at any moment. You realize that life continues whether or not you understand it. Seasons change, people grow, opportunities appear, endings occur. Understanding may follow, but it is not required for movement. Accepting this flow allows you to move with it instead of standing still waiting for clarity. There is courage in allowing uncertainty to exist without resistance. It is not the dramatic courage of confrontation, but the quiet courage of openness. You remain receptive even when outcomes are unclear. Joy becomes less dependent on explanation as well. You enjoy experiences without needing to justify them. Laughter does not need a reason. Beauty does not need interpretation. Presence becomes enough. You begin to see how much suffering came from postponing peace until life felt coherent. That postponement kept peace always just out of reach. Removing the condition brings it into the present. The mind learns to rest in not knowing. This rest is not ignorance, but acceptance of limits. It acknowledges that some aspects of existence are meant to be lived rather than understood. And in that acceptance, a gentle freedom appears. You are no longer chasing answers as if they hold the key to your stability. You are stable because you stopped requiring answers to feel whole. Life continues to unfold with its mysteries intact, but those mysteries no longer disturb you. They become part of the texture of existence, adding depth rather than anxiety. From this place, calm is no longer something you wait for. It is something you allow, even in the absence of certainty, even in the presence of unanswered questions, even when meaning has not yet revealed itself. And that is the quiet freedom, the ability to live fully without needing life to explain itself first. As the need for life to make sense loosened its grip, another habit quietly came into view, the instinct to take everything personally. When explanations were no longer required for peace, you began to notice how often the mind turned confusion into a story about you. Not just about what happened, but about what it supposedly meant about your worth, your luck, your place in the world. The search for meaning had been replaced by something subtler, the belief that events were somehow aimed at you. A heavy feeling starts to fade when the question, "Why is this happening to me?" loses its authority. That question carries an assumption that life is singling you out, targeting you, measuring you. It centers every difficulty around identity, transforming random events into personal verdicts. When this assumption dissolves, the emotional weight attached to events begins to fall away. There is a quiet realization that many things were never about you at all. People act from their own fears, histories, desires, and limitations. Circumstances unfold from countless conditions, intersecting in ways no individual controls. Weather changes, economies shift, relationships evolve, bodies age, not as punishments, but as natural processes. Seeing this clearly removes the sense of being personally attacked by existence. Victim consciousness thrives on narratives. It repeats the same story until it feels like truth, that you are unlucky, overlooked, misunderstood, burdened more than others. These stories shape perception, filtering new experiences through old conclusions. When you release them, perception becomes more neutral. You respond to what is happening now rather than what it reminds you of. There is relief in no longer needing a reason for suffering that centers your identity. Pain becomes something you experience, not something that defines you. You are not the one life keeps testing. You are the one living through events that happen to all humans in different forms. This shift changes how memory works. Instead of recalling the past as evidence of injustice, you see it as a series of moments shaped by many factors. Regret softens because you recognize how limited your awareness was at the time. You did not fail life. You acted with the understanding you had. Resentment begins to dissolve because it depends on the belief that someone deliberately caused your suffering. When you see how people are often driven by their own confusion and pain, anger loses its intensity. Compassion replaces it, not as forgiveness forced by effort, but as understanding that hurt people often hurt others without intending to. There is also freedom from comparison. Victim consciousness measures your difficulties against others, reinforcing the idea that you have been treated unfairly. Releasing this mindset allows you to see that everyone carries struggles you may never fully understand. Life becomes less about fairness and more about resilience. Responsibility returns in a healthier form. Without the victim narrative, you regain the ability to influence what is still within your reach. Instead of focusing on what happened, you focus on how you move forward. This restores a sense of agency that victimhood quietly erodes. Relationships become less defensive. When you are not expecting to be wronged, you listen without preparing counter-arguments. You communicate without assuming hidden hostility. Trust grows because you are no longer interpreting every action through a lens of suspicion. There is also a shift in how you handle criticism. Without the belief that you are under attack, feedback becomes information rather than insult. You evaluate it calmly, accepting what is useful and discarding what is not. Your self-worth becomes less dependent on others' opinions. The body reflects this change. Chronic tension associated with defensiveness begins to release. Shoulders drop, breathing deepens, posture opens. You no longer carry yourself as if bracing for impact. You start noticing opportunities where you once saw obstacles. Victim consciousness narrows focus to what is unfair, blinding you to possibilities. When it fades, curiosity returns. You explore instead of retreating. You experiment instead of assuming failure. Gratitude becomes easier because attention is no longer fixed on perceived injustice. You appreciate what is present rather than dwelling on what is missing. This appreciation does not deny hardship, it balances it. There is also humility in recognizing that you are not at the center of every story. Life is vast, interconnected, constantly moving. You are part of it, not its focal point. This perspective removes the pressure to interpret every event as a reflection of your significance. You become more patient with others' behavior. Instead of assuming malice, you consider context. Someone's harsh words may come from stress, fear, or misunderstanding, rather than a desire to harm you. This understanding prevents unnecessary conflict. Inner dialogue changes too. The voice that once said, "This always happens to me," becomes quieter. In its place appears a more balanced perspective. This happened, and now it is over. The absence of dramatization reduces emotional intensity. Healing accelerates because energy is no longer spent reinforcing the wound through narrative. You allow experiences to settle without constantly reopening them to confirm your story. Time regains its ability to soften edges. You also stop seeking validation for your suffering. Victim consciousness often looks for agreement from others to justify its perspective. Without it, you no longer need others to confirm that you were wronged in order to feel understood. There is a quiet dignity in accepting life without interpreting it as persecution. You carry yourself with steadiness instead of defensiveness. You engage with challenges directly instead of filtering them through identity. Purpose emerges in unexpected ways. Without being defined by past pain, you explore what truly matters to you now. You build a life based on values rather than reactions to old wounds. Joy becomes less fragile because it is not overshadowed by suspicion that something will ruin it. You allow yourself to enjoy moments without anticipating disappointment. There is also forgiveness toward yourself. Victim narratives often include self-blame disguised as regret. Releasing them allows you to see your past choices with compassion rather than harsh judgment. You become less reactive to minor inconveniences. Without the underlying belief that life is unfair to you, small frustrations remain small. They pass quickly instead of triggering larger emotional responses. Confidence grows from this stability, not the loud confidence of superiority, but the quiet confidence of someone who no longer feels targeted by existence. You trust your ability to navigate whatever arises. Presence deepens because attention is no longer divided between the current moment and the story of why it shouldn't be happening. You experience life directly, without commentary. You also recognize how much suffering came from defending an identity built around hardship. Letting that identity fade feels like stepping out of a heavy costume you forgot you were wearing. Compassion for others increases because you see how easily anyone can fall into victim narratives when pain is fresh. You support without reinforcing the belief that they are powerless. There is peace in realizing that life was never singling you out. It was unfolding according to patterns larger than individual preference. You were not being punished. You were participating in the human experience. And in that realization, the question that once dominated your mind fades into silence. Not because you found an answer, but because you no longer need one. What remains is a calm understanding that you are not defined by what happened to you, but by how you choose to live now. From this place, life feels less like a battle and more like a journey. You are finally free to walk without carrying the weight of personal grievance. As the sense of being singled out by life faded, something even more surprising came into view. It was no longer just about releasing the belief that events were happening to you, but seeing that events were not hostile in the first place. The feeling of being targeted had quietly shaped how you interpreted everything. Delays felt like sabotage, endings felt like betrayal, obstacles felt like personal blocks placed in your path. When that lens cracked, reality began to look different, less like an enemy and more like a movement that never stopped for anyone. A strange calm appears when you realize life is not pushing against you. It is simply unfolding. The rain does not fall to ruin your plans. Time does not move to take something away from you. People change not to hurt you, but because change is the nature of living things. When this becomes clear, tension dissolves because there is no longer an invisible opponent to defend yourself against. You start noticing how much energy was spent bracing for attacks that never truly existed. The body carried a constant readiness, as if the next disappointment would confirm that the world was against you. Without that expectation, the nervous system relaxes. You move through situations without anticipating harm in every turn. There is also a shift in how you interpret obstacles. Instead of seeing them as barriers placed deliberately in your way, you see them as part of the terrain. Just as a river flows around rocks without questioning why they are there, you begin to navigate challenges without assigning intention to them. This removes frustration, because frustration often comes from believing something should not exist. Patience deepens because processes take time, regardless of personal preference. Growth, healing, learning, rebuilding, all unfold gradually. When you stop expecting instant results, you stop interpreting slow progress as failure. You allow things to develop at their natural pace. Your relationship with uncertainty changes too. Instead of treating it as a threat, you see it as an open field where possibilities exist. The unknown becomes space rather than danger. This perspective reduces anxiety because it removes the assumption that unpredictability is inherently negative. You begin to observe patterns rather than isolated incidents. Situations that once felt random reveal connections to broader cycles. Seasons of effort, seasons of rest, phases of expansion and contraction. Recognizing these patterns provides reassurance that difficulties are not permanent states, but temporary conditions within a larger movement. There is freedom in realizing you do not need to control the flow to benefit from it. You position yourself wisely instead of trying to redirect the current. Opportunities appear more clearly because you are watching rather than fighting. Relationships feel less combative as well. You stop viewing disagreements as attacks and start seeing them as differences in perspective shaped by unique experiences. This reduces defensiveness and opens the door to understanding. You also become less reactive to setbacks. When plans change, you adjust instead of collapsing. Adaptability replaces rigidity because you accept that movement is constant. Stability is found in flexibility, not resistance. Grief transforms in this understanding. Loss is no longer interpreted as something taken away unjustly, but as part of the natural cycle of beginnings and endings. This perspective does not remove sadness, but it removes bitterness. You mourn without feeling robbed. Your sense of identity becomes less fixed. If reality is always moving, then you are not required to remain the same either. You allow yourself to evolve without clinging to past versions of who you were. This openness makes change less frightening. There is also a growing appreciation for timing. Some things arrive late because conditions were not ready before. Some things leave early because their role has been completed. Trusting timing reduces the urge to force outcomes prematurely. You begin to notice beauty in motion itself, the way conversations shift, how opportunities emerge unexpectedly, how paths cross and separate. Life feels dynamic rather than static, alive rather than rigid. Control becomes less appealing because you see how limited it is compared to the intelligence of natural processes. You cooperate with circumstances instead of imposing yourself on them. This cooperation produces smoother results than constant struggle. Even your goals feel different. You pursue them with dedication, but without hostility toward anything that delays them. Setbacks become feedback rather than opposition. You adjust your approach instead of questioning your worth. There is humility in recognizing that you are part of something vast. This humility softens ego-driven reactions. You stop interpreting every inconvenience as a personal injustice because you understand the scale of forces at play. Attention shifts from resistance to observation. You watch how events unfold, learning from them instead of arguing with them. This observational mindset increases wisdom because it prioritizes understanding over control. Peace becomes less fragile because it is not dependent on circumstances staying favorable. It exists within movement, within change, within unpredictability. You carry it with you rather than waiting for the world to provide it. You also become more compassionate toward yourself. Recognizing that life moves beyond personal intention reduces harsh self-judgment. You forgive mistakes because you see how limited your perspective was at the time. Curiosity replaces fear. Instead of asking why something happened to you, you become interested in how it is unfolding and what it might lead to. This curiosity keeps you engaged with life instead of withdrawing from it. There is gratitude for experiences that once felt inconvenient. Detours introduce new people, new skills, new perspectives. What seemed like obstacles often become turning points in hindsight. You start to trust the process of living itself, not because you believe everything will turn out perfectly, but because you see that movement continues even through difficulty. Life carries you forward whether you resist or cooperate. This trust allows deeper rest. You no longer feel responsible for holding the world together. You allow yourself to pause, to recover, to simply exist without constant effort. Moments of stillness gain new meaning. They are not interruptions of progress, but part of the rhythm that sustains it. Rest becomes as valuable as action. You also recognize that suffering often came from trying to freeze reality in a preferred state. Wanting good moments to last forever and bad ones to disappear instantly created tension. Accepting movement dissolves this tension because nothing needs to stay or leave on your command. There is courage in flowing with life because it requires letting go of certainty, yet this courage is gentle, not forceful. It trusts rather than pushes. You begin to feel connected to the world instead of separate from it. Events are no longer happening around you, but with you. You are part of the unfolding, not an observer standing outside it. This connection reduces loneliness because you sense participation in something larger than personal concerns. Even ordinary moments feel meaningful because they are expressions of movement. And in this awareness, a quiet understanding settles in. Reality was never opposing you. It was never blocking your path or testing your strength. It was simply moving, carrying everything within it, including you. When you stop pushing against that movement, you discover a way of living that feels lighter, smoother, more aligned. Not because life became easy, but because you stopped mistaking its motion for hostility. As you began to see that reality was not working against you, but simply moving, another fear quietly started losing its grip. The fear of what has not even happened yet. If life was not an enemy in the present, maybe it was not waiting to ambush you in the future either. This realization softened the constant tension of anticipating disaster, the habit of rehearsing problems before they existed, the silent expectation that something would eventually go wrong. Without that expectation, the future stopped feeling like a shadow following you everywhere. A subtle calm enters when you realize most fear of the future is built from imagination, not experience. The mind projects unfinished worries into tomorrow, stacking possibilities until they feel real. But when you return to the present and see that nothing threatening is actually happening now, the urgency fades. You understand that anxiety was created by time traveling mentally, not by immediate danger. There is relief in no longer treating uncertainty as a warning signal. Uncertainty becomes neutral, simply the absence of information. It no longer demands that you prepare for every negative outcome. You allow tomorrow to remain unknown without filling it with worst-case scenarios. The body responds to this shift quickly. Muscles unclench, breathing slows, sleep becomes deeper because the mind is not rehearsing emergencies through the night. The nervous system finally receives the message that vigilance is no longer required at all hours. You begin to notice how anticipatory anxiety kept you from fully experiencing good moments. Even during happiness, a part of your mind was bracing for its end. Without that tension, joy feels more complete because it is not overshadowed by fear of loss. Decision-making becomes easier because you are no longer paralyzed by imagining every possible consequence. You act based on present information rather than hypothetical disasters. This makes action more fluid and less exhausting. There is also a new patience with outcomes. You trust that whatever unfolds will be handled when it arrives, not before. This trust reduces the impulse to rush, to force results prematurely just to escape uncertainty. Relationships benefit as well. You stop assuming people will eventually disappoint you. You engage with them as they are now, instead of preparing for future hurt. This openness allows deeper connection because you are not holding back defensively. Work and creativity improve because mental energy is no longer consumed by fear of failure. You focus on the task itself rather than the imagined consequences of doing it wrong. This presence increases both quality and enjoyment. You start recognizing how often anxiety was tied to the illusion of control, wanting guarantees before taking steps, wanting assurance that everything would work out before committing. Letting go of that need frees you to move forward without waiting for certainty that may never come. There is also acceptance that discomfort is part of growth. Fear of the future often comes from fear of feeling unprepared or exposed. When you accept that these feelings are survivable, they lose their ability to intimidate you. Gratitude for the present deepens because it is no longer overshadowed by future worries. Ordinary moments feel sufficient without being compared to what might go wrong later. You become less reactive to news, predictions, and speculation. Instead of absorbing every alarming possibility, you maintain perspective, recognizing that not everything you hear will affect your life directly. Your sense of time changes. Instead of living ahead of yourself, you live with yourself. Days feel fuller because attention is not divided between now and imagined tomorrows. Hope becomes more realistic. It is no longer tied to specific outcomes, but to the belief that you can navigate whatever occurs. This hope is stable because it does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. There is courage in allowing the future to unfold without interference. It is a quiet courage, grounded in acceptance rather than bravado. You face uncertainty without needing to conquer it. Mistakes lose their power to haunt you before they even happen. You stop fearing errors so intensely because you know they can be corrected, learned from, integrated into your growth. You also become more adaptable. When plans change, you adjust instead of collapsing into frustration. Flexibility replaces rigidity because you are not clinging to a fixed vision of how things must go. Moments of stillness feel safe instead of threatening because they are no longer filled with anxious predictions. Silence becomes restorative rather than unsettling. Your identity shifts from someone trying to secure the future to someone capable of meeting it. This shift brings confidence that does not rely on external guarantees. There is also compassion for others who are still trapped in anticipatory fear. You recognize the exhaustion in their eyes, the tension in their voices, because you once carried it too. Your calm presence becomes reassuring to them. You begin to trust timing. Some things cannot be forced, only allowed. Opportunities, healing, understanding, All arrive when conditions are ready, not when anxiety demands them. There is freedom in not needing to know how everything will turn out. You engage with life as a process rather than a destination. This perspective makes each step meaningful on its own. Even setbacks lose their ability to dominate your thoughts beforehand. If they happen, you deal with them then. Until that moment, you allow yourself to live without borrowing trouble from the future. Energy returns because it is no longer invested in preventing hypothetical scenarios. You channel it into actions that enrich the present, learning, connecting, creating. You notice beauty more easily because attention is not preoccupied. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, experiences richer when the mind is not elsewhere. There is also a quiet faith that develops, not in a specific outcome, but in life's capacity to carry you through change. This faith is grounded in experience, in having faced uncertainty before and survived. Peace becomes durable because it is not tied to certainty. It coexists with the unknown, with unpredictability, with open possibilities. And eventually, the future loses its intimidating shape. It becomes simply another direction in which life will move, not a looming threat. You walk toward it without resistance, without dread, with the steady understanding that whatever awaits will be met when it becomes present. In that understanding, anticipatory anxiety collapses, not through force, but through the realization that the future never had power over you. Only the stories you told about it did. As the future stopped feeling like a threat waiting in the distance, attention naturally returned to what was actually here. Without constant scanning ahead for danger, another habit became visible: the mind's tendency to leave the present altogether. Even when nothing was wrong, it slipped backward into memories or forward into possibilities, rarely staying where life was unfolding. You began to notice that exhaustion did not come only from fear of tomorrow, but from being pulled between what already happened and what had not yet occurred. A quiet sadness surfaces when you realize how much of your life was lived somewhere else. Conversations half heard because your mind was replaying an old mistake. Moments of beauty missed because you were rehearsing a future worry. The present was never the problem, yet it was the place you visited the least. Seeing this clearly creates a desire to come back, not to escape the past or future, but to stop abandoning the only moment that is real. Regret loses its intensity when you stop treating the past as a place you can still influence. Memories remain, but they stop demanding correction. You understand that replaying them does not change outcomes. It only reactivates the emotions tied to them. By allowing memories to exist without reopening them, the emotional charge begins to fade. There is also forgiveness that emerges, not forced, but natural. You see your past self with more compassion because you recognize how limited your perspective was at the time. Decisions made in confusion or fear no longer feel like permanent stains on your identity. They become evidence of learning rather than proof of failure. The future loses its grip at the same time. Without projecting fear forward, the mind has no reason to leave the present. Planning still happens, but it becomes practical rather than obsessive. You prepare and then return to now instead of living inside scenarios that may never occur. Your senses sharpen as attention settles, sounds become clearer, colors richer, physical sensations more noticeable. The world feels more vivid because awareness is no longer diluted by mental travel. Even ordinary activities carry a sense of depth that was previously hidden by distraction. Relationships improve because you are actually there. You listen fully instead of responding to something said hours ago or worrying about something that might be said later. Presence communicates care more powerfully than words. People feel seen because you are not mentally elsewhere. There is also a surprising efficiency in living this way. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable because you address them one at a time instead of stacking them mentally. Focus replaces fragmentation, making effort feel lighter. Anxiety decreases because the mind is not constantly revisiting emotional hotspots. The body calms as it stops reliving stress responses triggered by memory or anticipation. You feel less drained because you are not carrying multiple timelines at once. You start to trust the unfolding of moments without needing to predict them. Each step reveals the next without requiring constant monitoring. This trust allows you to move forward without hesitation. Joy becomes more accessible because it is no longer postponed. You allow yourself to enjoy what is happening without thinking about how long it will last or what it might lead to. Happiness becomes immediate rather than conditional. There is also a new relationship with silence. Without mental noise from past and future, silence feels peaceful instead of empty. It becomes a space where awareness rests rather than a void that needs filling. Creativity expands because the mind is not recycling old narratives. Fresh ideas appear when attention is free from repetition. Inspiration flows more easily because you are receptive rather than preoccupied. You become more attuned to your body's signals. Hunger, fatigue, tension, these are noticed before they escalate because you are present enough to respond early. Self-care becomes intuitive rather than scheduled. Time itself feels different. Days no longer blur together because each moment is experienced fully. Memory improves because experiences are actually registered instead of half-lived. There is humility in recognizing how little control you have over the flow of life. Instead of trying to capture moments or hold on to them, you allow them to pass naturally. This acceptance reduces the fear of loss because you are no longer clinging. You also become less reactive to triggers. When memories surface, you observe them without diving in. They pass like clouds rather than pulling you into storms. This observation creates distance between you and your thoughts. Gratitude deepens because attention rests on what is present rather than what is missing. You appreciate small details that were previously overlooked. The rhythm of breathing, the warmth of light, the comfort of quiet. Your identity becomes less tied to your history. You are not defined by what happened before. You are defined by how you show up now. This freedom allows growth without the weight of past labels. Fear of missing out fades because you are fully engaged in what you are doing. Comparison loses its appeal because you are not mentally measuring your life against others' timelines. There is also a sense of timelessness that occasionally appears, moments where awareness feels expansive and unhurried. In these moments, the pressure of schedules and deadlines loosens, replaced by a deeper rhythm. You become more patient because you are not rushing toward an imagined future. Waiting no longer feels like wasted time. It becomes another opportunity to be present. Even pain is experienced differently. Without resistance or mental escape, discomfort is felt directly and often passes more quickly. Suffering decreases because it is not prolonged by analysis. There is a quiet confidence in knowing you can return to the present at any time. No matter how far the mind wanders, awareness is always available as an anchor. You also recognize how rare true presence is in a distracted world. This recognition increases appreciation for moments when you share it with others. Simple interactions become meaningful because they are fully lived. Peace stabilizes because it is grounded in reality rather than memory or projection. It does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. It exists as long as attention remains here. Eventually, living in the present becomes less of an effort and more of a default. The mind still travels, but it returns more quickly. The pull of now becomes stronger than the pull of elsewhere. And in that return, you discover something simple yet profound. Life was never happening in the past or the future. It was always here, waiting patiently for your attention. As your attention returned to the present and stopped wandering through past regrets and future fears, something subtle began to reveal itself. Life was no longer a blur of reactions happening faster than you could understand them. You started noticing a small opening between what happened and what you did next. It had always been there, but the noise of emotional time travel kept you from seeing it. In that opening, a new kind of power appeared, quiet, steady, and deeply freeing. A gentle shift occurs the first time you recognize that you are not required to react immediately. For most of your life, reactions felt automatic, as if events pulled responses out of you without permission. Words triggered words, tone triggered tone, stress triggered urgency. But when awareness settles in the present, the chain breaks. You see the event clearly, and instead of being swept away, you pause. That pause is not hesitation or weakness. It is clarity gathering itself before movement. In that brief stillness, emotions rise and fall without dictating action. You feel anger without lashing out, fear without retreating, excitement without rushing blindly. The experience is new because it reveals that feelings are signals, not commands. There is relief in discovering that you do not have to be controlled by your first impulse. The first impulse often comes from habit, conditioning, or past wounds rather than wisdom. When you allow it to pass, deeper understanding surfaces. You respond from who you are now instead of who you were shaped to be. Communication changes immediately. Instead of reacting defensively, you listen fully. You consider meaning rather than tone alone. You choose words that reflect intention rather than emotion. Conversations become calmer because you are no longer escalating them unconsciously. You also become more trustworthy to yourself. Acting from awareness instead of impulse creates consistency. You stop surprising yourself with reactions you later regret. This consistency builds confidence because you know you can handle situations without losing control. There is a sense of dignity in responding rather than reacting. You carry yourself with steadiness even in difficult moments. Others notice this calm presence, often without understanding why it feels reassuring. Conflict loses its intensity because escalation requires immediate reaction from both sides. When one person pauses, the energy changes. Anger has nowhere to land. The situation begins to soften instead of spiral. Decision-making improves because choices are not rushed by emotion. You weigh consequences more carefully. You consider long-term impact rather than short-term relief. This leads to outcomes that align with your values rather than your fears. You start recognizing triggers before they take over. Certain topics, tones, or situations once caused instant reactions. Now you see them approaching like waves and prepare to stay grounded as they pass. This preparation reduces their power. There is also compassion for your past self who did not know this space existed. You understand why reactions felt unavoidable before awareness developed. This compassion replaces shame with understanding. Your nervous system benefits as well. Constant reactivity keeps the body in a state of stress. Pausing signals safety, allowing relaxation even in challenging environments. Over time, this reduces chronic tension. You become less predictable in the best way. People who relied on provoking reactions find their strategies ineffective. Without emotional hooks, manipulation loses its influence. Creativity increases because the pause allows new possibilities to emerge. Instead of repeating familiar patterns, you explore different responses. This flexibility brings freshness to everyday interactions. You also gain freedom from external control. When reactions are automatic, others can steer your behavior by pushing the right buttons. When you pause, control returns to you. You decide what deserves a response. Self-respect deepens because you act in ways that reflect your intentions rather than your impulses. You become someone you admire rather than someone you tolerate. Patience becomes natural rather than forced. Waiting no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like alignment with timing. You trust that not every moment requires immediate action. Even joy is experienced more fully. Without rushing to capture or prolong it, you savor it as it unfolds. The pause allows appreciation to deepen. You notice how much of life becomes simpler when reactions are not exaggerated. Small inconveniences remain small. Minor misunderstandings resolve quickly. Energy is preserved for what truly matters. There is also a moral clarity that develops. You recognize when silence is wiser than speech, when firmness is needed, when compassion is appropriate. These distinctions arise naturally from observation rather than rigid rules. You become less defensive because you are not interpreting every comment as a threat. Curiosity replaces suspicion. You seek understanding before forming conclusions. Physical movement reflects this calm. Gestures become deliberate, posture relaxed, pace steady. You move through space without urgency because you are not chasing or escaping anything. You also become more attentive to others' pauses. You recognize when someone else is choosing restraint instead of reacting. This awareness fosters mutual respect. Gratitude emerges for the simplicity of being able to choose. Many people never discover this space and remain trapped in cycles of reaction. Recognizing your freedom increases appreciation for awareness itself. You begin to trust silence in conversations. Silence is no longer awkward but meaningful, allowing thoughts to settle and sincerity to surface. Mistakes become less frequent because you are not acting under pressure. When errors occur, you correct them calmly instead of reacting defensively. There is a quiet joy in knowing that freedom does not require changing circumstances. It exists in how you meet them. This realization makes you less dependent on external stability. You also experience less emotional exhaustion. Reactivity drains energy quickly. Pausing conserves it, allowing you to remain present longer without fatigue. Over time, this way of being becomes natural. The pause appears automatically, not as a technique, but as a reflection of inner stillness. You respond thoughtfully, without effort. And in that stillness, you discover that freedom was never about controlling events. It was about not being controlled by them. The space between event and reaction becomes a place where wisdom lives, where intention replaces impulse, where you meet life with clarity instead of confusion. From here, every moment carries the potential for choice. Not forced, not dramatic, simply available. And that availability changes everything, because it means you are no longer pushed through life by circumstance. You are walking through it consciously, step by steady step. As you learn to rest in that quiet space between event and reaction, another realization began to surface. If you were no longer reacting automatically, then you were also no longer the person who had been shaped by constant struggle. The identity built around fighting, enduring, proving, surviving started to loosen. You began to see how much of your self-image had been tied to resistance, to being the one who carries burdens, the one who never breaks, the one who keeps pushing no matter what. When the pushing stopped, a question appeared that felt both unsettling and freeing. Who are you without the struggle? There is a strange emptiness at first when you stop defining yourself by what you overcame. Struggle had given your life a narrative, a sense of purpose, even a sense of strength. Without it, the mind searches for familiar tension, as if calm is something suspicious. But this emptiness is not loss. It is space. Space that was previously occupied by constant effort. You start noticing how often you introduce stress into situations that did not require it, simply because tension felt normal. Peace felt unfamiliar, almost undeserved. Letting go of the struggle identity means allowing ease to exist without feeling guilty about it. There is relief in no longer needing to prove resilience at every moment. You do not have to demonstrate strength through suffering. You do not have to carry more than necessary to validate your worth. Strength becomes quieter, expressed through steadiness rather than endurance. Your self-talk changes. Instead of describing yourself as someone who has been through so much, you begin to see yourself as someone who is free to experience life without carrying past battles into every situation. The story shifts from survival to presence. Relationships become lighter because you are not unconsciously seeking roles that confirm your old identity. You stop gravitating towards situations that require you to be the fixer, the protector, the one who sacrifices constantly. You allow mutual support instead of one-sided giving. There is also freedom from comparison based on hardship. You no longer measure your experiences against others' struggles to determine who has suffered more. Compassion replaces competition. Your goals change as well. Instead of pursuing achievements to escape past pain or prove your strength, you pursue what genuinely interests you. Motivation becomes curiosity instead of pressure. Rest becomes restorative rather than uncomfortable. Previously, stillness felt like stagnation because struggle had conditioned you to equate movement with value. Now, rest feels like alignment, a necessary part of living fully. You also become more playful. Without the weight of constant seriousness, humor returns. You laugh more easily because you are not guarding yourself against the next challenge. Creativity expands because your mind is no longer occupied with maintaining an image of toughness. You explore ideas without fear of appearing vulnerable or uncertain. There is compassion for the version of you that needed struggle to feel significant. You recognize how that identity protected you during difficult times. Instead of rejecting it, you thank it and allow it to rest. Your body reflects this shift. Chronic tension dissolves because it no longer needs to prepare for battle. Movements become relaxed, breathing deeper, sleep more peaceful. You begin to enjoy success without waiting for something to go wrong. The expectation that calm must be temporary fades. You allow stability to exist without anticipating its collapse. There is also humility in accepting that you do not have to carry everything alone. Asking for help no longer feels like weakness because your identity is not built on independence at all costs. Forgiveness deepens, especially toward yourself. You release the belief that you must keep paying for past mistakes through ongoing struggle. You allow yourself to move forward without dragging chains behind you. Your perception of time changes. Life feels less like a series of battles and more like a continuous unfolding. You stop bracing for impact and start noticing opportunities for growth and connection. There is gratitude for simple experiences that were previously overshadowed by urgency. A quiet morning, a meaningful conversation, a walk without purpose. These become enough. You also become less defensive when others misunderstand you. Without needing to protect an identity tied to hardship, you let go of the need to correct every perception. You know who you are without constant validation. Confidence stabilizes because it is no longer tied to performance. You trust your presence rather than your achievements. This confidence feels calm rather than intense. You notice how much energy becomes available when you stop carrying the past as proof of your strength. That energy can now be used for creation, connection, exploration. There is a sense of renewal, as if you are meeting yourself again without the armor you wore for years. This meeting feels tender but honest. You also become more patient with others' journeys. Recognizing how long it took you to release your struggle identity, you allow others the time they need to do the same. Joy becomes less complicated because it is not filtered through suspicion. You allow happiness without questioning whether you deserve it. Your values clarify. Without the noise of survival mode, you see what truly matters: kindness, presence, authenticity, growth. There is also courage in embracing a softer way of being. Softness is not fragility, it is openness. It allows connection without defensiveness. You begin to trust that life does not require constant hardship to be meaningful. Meaning can arise from love, creativity, learning, service, not just from endurance. Peace settles deeper because it is not interrupted by the need to return to struggle for identity. You allow yourself to exist without tension as your baseline. There is also a quiet pride in recognizing how far you have come, not measured by what you endured, but by how gently you now move through the world. Your future feels different because it is not framed as another battlefield. It becomes a landscape to explore rather than something to conquer. And in that landscape, you discover a version of yourself that was always there but overshadowed by the need to survive. A version that does not need struggle to feel real, that does not need pain to feel strong, that does not need constant effort to feel worthy. This version of you moves through life with calm confidence, grounded not in resistance but in acceptance, not in fighting but in understanding. The identity built on struggle fades quietly, replaced by something lighter, more fluid, more alive. Who you become is not someone new, but someone uncovered, a person who no longer measures life by battles won, but by moments fully lived. As the identity built on struggle slowly dissolved, something else loosened its grip as well. The need to tie every loose end, to resolve every unanswered question, to make every story reach a clean conclusion. You began to see how much energy had been spent waiting for explanations that never came, apologies that were never spoken, outcomes that never arrived. Without defining yourself by what you fought, the urgency to finish every unfinished chapter started to fade. And in that fading, a surprising relief appeared, as if you had set down a weight you did not realize you were still carrying. A quiet discomfort surfaces when you first accept that some things will never be resolved. The mind resists this idea because it prefers complete stories. It wants clarity, fairness, symmetry. But life rarely provides these things in the way you expect. People leave without explaining themselves. Opportunities disappear without closure. Words remain unsaid. Accepting this feels like stepping into uncertainty, yet it is also the doorway to peace. You begin to notice how the demand for closure kept old situations alive long after they had ended. By replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, or waiting for a final message, you were maintaining a connection to something that no longer existed in reality. Letting go of closure does not erase the past, but it removes the emotional hook that keeps pulling you back. There is freedom in allowing a story to remain unfinished. You stop trying to edit events into something that feels fair or meaningful. You allow them to be exactly what they were: incomplete, imperfect, unresolved. This acceptance softens the sharp edges of memory. Forgiveness becomes easier because it no longer depends on acknowledgement from others. You do not need someone to admit wrongdoing for you to release resentment. You understand that holding on to anger keeps you tied to the situation more than it affects the other person. You also stop searching for hidden messages in silence. When someone does not respond, when an explanation never comes, you no longer interpret it as a puzzle to solve. You accept silence as its own answer, even if it is not satisfying. This shift brings calm to relationships that ended abruptly. Instead of wondering what you did wrong or what could have been different, you allow the connection to exist in memory without dissecting it. The emotional charge decreases because analysis is no longer feeding it. Your attention returns to what is present instead of what is missing. Energy that was spent on unresolved past situations becomes available for current experiences. You feel more engaged with life because you are not mentally revisiting unfinished business. There is also a deeper understanding of human limitation. People act from their own confusion, fears, and blind spots. Not every action is intentional or meaningful. Recognizing this reduces the need to interpret everything personally. Grief transforms when closure is no longer required. Loss remains painful, but it stops being complicated by unanswered questions. You mourn what happened without needing to fully understand it. You start to trust that peace does not depend on resolution. It comes from acceptance, from allowing life to include uncertainty and incompleteness. This trust reduces anxiety because you are not waiting for a final piece to fall into place. The mind becomes quieter because it is not constantly searching for conclusions. Thoughts slow down, making space for clarity and rest. You also become more resilient to future uncertainty. When new situations arise without clear outcomes, you are less disturbed. You have learned that stability does not require complete information. There is a sense of maturity in recognizing that closure is not always a gift others can give you. Sometimes it is something you grant yourself by deciding to stop reopening the past. You begin to appreciate the beauty of open endings. Not everything needs to be defined to be meaningful. Some experiences remain significant precisely because they were incomplete. Self-compassion grows because you stop blaming yourself for not resolving everything. You accept that you did what you could with the understanding you had at the time. Your expectations of others become more realistic. You no longer demand perfect communication or emotional clarity from people who may not be capable of providing it. There is also relief in not needing to explain yourself endlessly. You allow misunderstandings to exist without chasing correction. Your sense of identity no longer depends on being fully understood by everyone. You discover that closure often comes quietly when you stop searching for it. Distance, time, and acceptance do their work without force. The emotional landscape of your life becomes less cluttered. Old situations fade into the background instead of dominating your thoughts. You also become more open to new experiences because you are not comparing them to unresolved past ones. Fresh connections are allowed to exist on their own terms. Trust in life deepens. You see that even without perfect endings, life continues to unfold with opportunities for growth and meaning. There is gratitude for the lessons learned, even when the story did not end the way you hoped. You recognize that understanding does not always arrive in the form of explanations. You feel lighter because you are not carrying unfinished conversations in your mind. Silence becomes peaceful instead of heavy. There is courage in letting go of the need for final answers. You step forward without certainty, guided by presence rather than resolution. Your sense of freedom expands because the past no longer holds you in place. You move without waiting for permission from memories. Eventually, you realize that closure was never about finishing the story. It was about releasing the need for the story to be different. And when that need dissolves, the haunting stops, not because everything was resolved, but because you stopped resisting what remained unresolved. In that acceptance, life opens again, not as a series of problems to solve, but as a flow of experiences to live. As the need for closure faded and unresolved stories stopped pulling your attention backward, another habit began to weaken without effort: the constant urge to measure your life against someone else's. You noticed how often comparison had been fueled by unfinished feelings, by the belief that others had moved on while you were still searching for answers. But once you allowed your own story to remain incomplete without distress, the pressure to check where you stood in relation to others started dissolving. It became clear that comparison had been another way of resisting reality, another attempt to force life into a hierarchy that could explain your place in it. A quiet discomfort appears the first time you stop comparing because you realize how automatic it had been. The mind was always scanning for who was ahead, who was behind, who was doing better, who was falling short. Without that mental scoreboard, there is a strange silence, as if a background noise has suddenly disappeared. Relief follows quickly. You no longer feel the need to evaluate your progress based on someone else's timeline. Achievements regain their personal meaning instead of being reduced to proof that you are keeping up. You celebrate what matters to you, not what impresses others. You also become less threatened by other people's success. Their progress stops feeling like evidence of your inadequacy. You can appreciate their accomplishments without translating them into criticism of yourself. Envy loses its grip because it relies on the belief that life is a competition with limited rewards. Acceptance reveals that paths are not interchangeable. What belongs to someone else does not diminish what is available to you. Your sense of identity stabilizes because it is no longer shaped by contrast. You are not defined by being better or worse than anyone else. You exist on your own terms. There is also freedom from the pressure to perform. Without comparison, you do not need to constantly demonstrate worth. You act from interest and purpose rather than validation. Relationships deepen because you are not subtly competing with the people you care about. You can support them sincerely without measuring their progress against yours. You notice how much of social tension comes from unspoken comparison. When that habit fades, interactions become lighter. Conversations focus on connection rather than status. Contentment becomes more accessible. You appreciate what you have without constantly scanning for what others possess. Gratitude replaces dissatisfaction. Your goals become clearer because they are not influenced by trends or expectations. You pursue what resonates with you instead of what looks impressive from the outside. There is also relief from the fear of falling behind. Without a universal timeline, there is no behind or ahead, only different rhythms of growth. You start recognizing the uniqueness of your experiences. What you have learned through your challenges cannot be compared to someone else's path. Each life becomes its own story, rather than a chapter in a shared narrative. Judgment toward others softens as well. When you stop ranking yourself, you stop ranking them. Compassion replaces criticism. Your mind becomes quieter because comparison requires constant evaluation. Without it, mental space opens for observation and presence. You feel less urgency to document or display your life. Experiences become valuable in themselves rather than as evidence of success. There is humility in recognizing that everyone is navigating unseen struggles. External appearances no longer serve as reliable indicators of fulfillment. You become more patient with your own progress. Growth is no longer rushed to match someone else's pace. You allow yourself to evolve naturally. Confidence deepens because it is rooted in self-acceptance rather than superiority. You trust your direction without needing approval. There is also creativity in exploring paths that others might overlook. Without fear of comparison, you take risks that align with your curiosity. You notice beauty in diversity of experience. Different lives become interesting rather than threatening. Variety replaces hierarchy. Your emotional stability improves because mood is not tied to how you measure up on a given day. Self-worth becomes consistent. You also become less susceptible to manipulation by external standards. Marketing, social pressure, and cultural expectations lose influence when you are not comparing. Peace grows because you are no longer living in a constant state of evaluation. Life becomes something to participate in, not something to win. There is gratitude for ordinary moments that were previously overshadowed by ambition. Simple experiences regain significance. You recognize that comparison often masked deeper insecurities. As acceptance strengthens, those insecurities lose their urgency. Your attention returns to what you can influence, your actions, your growth, your relationships, instead of what others are doing. There is joy in witnessing others thrive without feeling diminished. Their happiness becomes part of the richness of life rather than a reminder of lack. You also become more authentic because you are not shaping yourself to fit expectations. Expression becomes honest rather than strategic. The pressure to maintain an image fades. You allow yourself to be seen as you are without editing your life for comparison. You realize that time spent comparing was time not spent living. This awareness increases appreciation for the present. There is courage in stepping away from environments that encourage constant comparison. You choose spaces that support authenticity. Your sense of abundance expands. Instead of viewing opportunities as scarce, you see possibilities everywhere. You also become less reactive to criticism because your value is not determined by external judgment. Feedback becomes information rather than threat. Trust in your own journey deepens. Even without guarantees, you feel aligned with where you are. Eventually, comparison stops appearing altogether, not because you forced it away, but because it no longer makes sense. You see that life was never meant to be measured across different stories. And in that realization, a quiet freedom settles in. The freedom to live without constantly looking sideways. The freedom to move forward without checking who is watching. The freedom to exist without needing to prove that you belong where you are. As comparison faded and the need to measure your life against others lost its hold, another subtle habit became visible. The constant negotiation happening inside your mind. You noticed how often you tried to strike deals with reality itself, silently insisting that things should have turned out differently, that if you thought about it long enough, worried enough, resisted enough, life might rearrange itself to match your expectations. Without the noise of comparison, this inner bargaining stood out clearly. And with that clarity came the chance to finally stop. A quiet tension lives inside the habit of negotiating with reality. It sounds like hope, but it feels like strain. The mind keeps repeating versions of the same thought. This should not be happening. This cannot be how it ends. Something must change. But reality does not respond to mental contracts. It simply continues moving, unaffected by internal arguments. You begin to see how much suffering came from trying to rewrite what had already occurred. Replaying conversations, imagining alternative outcomes, constructing scenarios where things turned out differently. All of it kept you tied to something that no longer existed. Letting go of negotiation does not erase disappointment, but it removes the illusion that resistance can alter the past. There is relief in accepting that some situations are not puzzles to solve, but facts to face. When you stop bargaining, energy that was spent on mental struggle becomes available for adaptation. Instead of asking why this happened, you begin asking what is needed now. You also notice how bargaining extends into the future. The mind promises that if you worry enough, prepare enough, anticipate every possibility, you might prevent discomfort. But this promise is empty. Anxiety does not protect you from uncertainty. It only makes you experience it twice. When negotiation ends, presence returns. You respond to what is happening instead of trying to manipulate outcomes through thought alone. This shift brings a sense of stability because you are grounded in reality rather than speculation. Relationships improve because you stop expecting people to change in order for you to feel at peace. You accept their limitations and decide how to engage with them realistically. This does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. It means seeing clearly instead of hoping endlessly. You also become more decisive. Without waiting for circumstances to align perfectly, you act based on what is available. Action replaces hesitation because you are not holding out for a better version of reality. There is humility in recognizing how little control thoughts have over external events. This humility reduces frustration because you stop expecting the world to operate according to your preferences. Your body relaxes as well. Negotiation creates tension because it keeps you braced against what is. Acceptance allows that tension to release, signaling safety to your nervous system. You start noticing how often negotiation disguised itself as persistence. While persistence can be valuable, bargaining with unchangeable facts only prolongs distress. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. There is also freedom in acknowledging loss without trying to minimize it. You allow grief to exist without bargaining for its reversal. This honesty deepens healing. Clarity improves because your perception is no longer distorted by wishful thinking. You see situations as they are, which allows more effective responses. You become less reactive to unexpected events. When plans change, you adjust instead of resisting. Flexibility replaces rigidity. There is trust in your ability to handle reality without needing to negotiate it into something easier. This trust strengthens resilience. You also discover that peace does not come from getting what you wanted, but from releasing the insistence that you must. Contentment becomes independent of outcomes. Your sense of time changes because you are not stuck replaying what might have been. Each moment becomes an opportunity rather than a reminder of unmet expectations. There is compassion for others who are still bargaining with their circumstances. You recognize the exhaustion in their struggle because you have lived it. You stop using phrases that keep negotiation alive, such as if only or what if. Language shifts toward acceptance, reflecting a new mindset. Creativity increases because you work with what exists instead of waiting for ideal conditions. Constraints become invitations rather than obstacles. You also become more grateful for what is present. Without focusing on what should have been, appreciation grows naturally. Confidence deepens because you trust your ability to navigate reality as it unfolds. You no longer depend on certainty to feel secure. There is also courage in facing difficult truths directly. Avoidance loses its appeal because honesty brings clarity. Your expectations become more flexible. You allow plans to evolve without interpreting changes as failures. You notice how negotiation often delayed necessary decisions. Without it, you move forward with greater ease. There is relief in not needing to convince yourself that everything will be okay. You accept uncertainty without forcing reassurance. You begin to see life as a process rather than a contract. Events unfold without guarantees, and that is not a problem to solve. Peace stabilizes because it is grounded in acceptance rather than hope for different circumstances. It remains even when situations are imperfect. You also experience more joy because attention is not consumed by resistance. Moments of beauty stand out more clearly. Eventually, the habit of negotiating fades completely. Reality no longer feels like an opponent to persuade, but a landscape to move through. And in that movement, you discover a deeper form of freedom, the freedom that comes from meeting life without conditions, without bargaining, without the quiet insistence that it must be otherwise. Life continues as it always has, but you meet it differently. Not with resistance, not with negotiation, but with calm willingness to participate in whatever unfolds next. As the habit of negotiating with reality fell away, you stopped trying to force life into predictable shapes. The constant bargaining had been an attempt to make the future feel controllable, to eliminate surprises before they arrived. Without that mental struggle, something unexpected became visible. Uncertainty had always been there, quietly shaping every moment, yet it was never truly the threat you believed it was. What frightened you was not unpredictability itself, but the resistance to it. When the resistance dissolved, uncertainty no longer felt like an approaching storm. It felt like open space. A subtle fear appears when you realize how much of your life was built around avoiding the unknown. Plans, routines, expectations, all designed to reduce the discomfort of not knowing what would happen next. These structures are not wrong, but they become fragile when treated as guarantees. Seeing this clearly creates both vulnerability and relief. You begin to notice that uncertainty is not the absence of safety, but the presence of possibility. Every meaningful change in your life emerged from something unpredictable. A conversation you did not expect, a path you did not plan, an event that disrupted your assumptions. Without uncertainty, life would be static, repetitive, and confined. There is calm in accepting that not everything needs to be anticipated. You stop scanning for hidden dangers in every new situation. Instead of bracing yourself, you allow experiences to unfold without preloading fear into them. Anxiety decreases because it feeds on imagined futures. When you stop treating those imagined outcomes as facts, the emotional intensity fades. You still prepare when necessary, but preparation no longer turns into obsession. Trust begins to replace control. You trust your ability to respond rather than your ability to predict. This trust is quieter but more stable than the illusion of certainty. Your perception of risk changes. Uncertainty does not automatically signal danger. It simply indicates that information is incomplete. This distinction prevents unnecessary alarm. You become more present because attention is not stretched across countless hypothetical scenarios. Awareness returns to what is actually happening. Flexibility increases. When plans shift, you adapt instead of collapsing. Change becomes part of the process rather than an interruption. There is humility in recognizing that life has always been uncertain, even during times that felt secure. Stability was never guaranteed. It was simply less obvious. You also become more compassionate toward others who struggle with unpredictability. Fear of the unknown is deeply human, and understanding this softens judgment. Creativity expands because uncertainty invites exploration. Without predetermined outcomes, you are free to experiment and discover. Your decision-making improves because you are not paralyzed by the need for perfect information. You act with what you know and adjust as new details emerge. There is also courage in stepping into situations without guarantees. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move despite it. You notice how much energy was wasted trying to foresee every possibility. Releasing that effort leaves you feeling lighter. Patience grows because you accept that clarity often arrives gradually. You allow time to reveal what cannot be understood immediately. Relationships deepen when you stop expecting predictability from people. You allow them to evolve instead of demanding consistency at all costs. There is gratitude for moments of surprise that bring joy. Uncertainty makes these moments possible. You also learn to distinguish between caution and fear. Caution protects you, fear restricts you. Acceptance allows caution without panic. Resilience strengthens because you are not shattered by unexpected events. You recover more quickly because you did not expect life to follow a rigid script. Your sense of identity becomes less dependent on stability. You remain grounded even as circumstances change. There is a quiet excitement in realizing that the future is not predetermined. Possibility replaces dread. You become more attentive to opportunities that appear suddenly. Without rigid expectations, you recognize potential in unexpected places. There is also relief in not needing to control everything. Responsibility becomes manageable when it is not mixed with impossible demands. You start trusting life's unfolding, not as blind optimism, but as recognition that unpredictability is part of growth. Your emotional range expands. You allow yourself to feel uncertainty without labeling it as negative. Confidence stabilizes because it comes from adaptability rather than certainty. You know you can handle change even if you cannot predict it. You also become less attached to outcomes. Effort matters more than results because results are influenced by variables beyond your control. There is wisdom in understanding that certainty is often an illusion. Even the most carefully planned lives contain unforeseen turns. Peace emerges from this understanding, not a fragile peace dependent on perfect conditions, but a grounded calm that remains even when the path ahead is unclear. You move forward without needing to see the entire road. Each step reveals the next, and that becomes enough. Eventually, uncertainty stops feeling like something to endure and starts feeling like something to live within. It becomes the backdrop of existence rather than a problem to solve. And in that acceptance, a deeper security appears. Not the security of knowing what will happen, but the security of knowing you can meet whatever happens with presence, clarity, and steadiness. Life remains unpredictable, yet you are no longer threatened by its openness. You walk into the unknown not as a victim of chance, but as a participant in a reality that was never meant to be fully controlled. As uncertainty stopped feeling like an enemy and became something you could live with, the constant urgency that once filled your days began to loosen. When you no longer needed the future to arrive quickly so you could finally feel safe, the pressure to hurry quietly faded. You started noticing how often you had rushed, not because life required it, but because discomfort made stillness unbearable. Without resistance to the unknown, time itself felt less threatening, and in that softened relationship with time, a new rhythm began to appear, one that was slower, steadier, and far more natural. A subtle exhaustion becomes visible when you realize how long you have been living as if you were late for something. Even during calm moments, there was a background tension pushing you forward, telling you that you should be somewhere else, doing something more, achieving something faster. Letting go of this pressure feels unfamiliar at first, like stepping off a moving walkway and discovering your own pace again. You begin to see that rushing was often an attempt to escape the present. When the current moment felt uncomfortable, the mind sped toward the next one, hoping relief would be waiting there. But relief rarely arrived because the habit of rushing followed you wherever you went. There is relief in allowing yourself to move without urgency. Ordinary tasks become calmer because they are no longer treated as obstacles between you and a future reward. Washing dishes, walking down a street, having a conversation, these experiences regain their texture when they are not hurried through. Your body responds quickly to this shift. Breathing deepens, shoulders relax, movements become less abrupt. The nervous system no longer interprets every moment as a race against time. This physical calm reinforces emotional stability. You start noticing details that were previously invisible. Colors seem richer, sounds clearer, sensations more distinct. Life feels fuller because attention is not divided between now and what comes next. Productivity improves in a quiet way. Without rushing, you make fewer mistakes and waste less energy correcting them. Focus replaces frantic effort, leading to better results with less strain. There is patience in waiting that did not exist before. Lines, delays, slow progress. These no longer feel like personal attacks. They become part of the flow rather than interruptions. You also become more attentive to the pace of others. Instead of pushing conversations forward or finishing sentences in your head, you allow people to express themselves fully. This presence deepens connection. Goals remain important, but they stop dominating your sense of worth. You work toward them steadily instead of urgently, trusting that progress does not require constant pressure. Sleep improves because your mind is not racing ahead even while your body is trying to rest. Nights become restorative instead of restless. There is also freedom from the fear of falling behind. Without comparing timelines or rushing to catch up, you recognize that life does not follow a single schedule. Each path unfolds at its own speed. Creativity flourishes when there is space to think without deadlines pressing on every idea. Inspiration often appears in moments of unhurried attention. You begin to enjoy transitions instead of resisting them. Moving from one activity to another becomes smooth rather than abrupt. You allow time for adjustment. There is gratitude for the ability to experience moments fully. You stop postponing enjoyment until after tasks are completed. Joy becomes part of the process instead of a distant reward. Your perception of aging changes as well. Time passing no longer feels like something chasing you. It becomes something you move with rather than against. You also become less reactive to external pressure. When others rush, you do not automatically absorb their urgency. You maintain your own rhythm. Decision-making becomes clearer because it is not rushed by anxiety. You consider options thoughtfully and act when you are ready. There is humility in recognizing that many things unfold beyond your control, regardless of how fast you move. Slowing down aligns you with reality rather than illusion. You start noticing how often rushing created unnecessary stress in relationships. Quick reactions, impatient responses, missed opportunities for empathy, all consequences of living too fast. There is peace in knowing that you do not have to fill every moment with activity. Stillness becomes valuable rather than uncomfortable. You also become more aware of your limits. Without pushing constantly, you recognize when you need rest, nourishment, or quiet. Self-care becomes natural. Your sense of time expands. Minutes feel longer, days more substantial, because they are actually experienced instead of rushed through. There is a quiet confidence in moving deliberately. Others may interpret it as calm authority because it signals that you are not controlled by urgency. You also become more resilient to stress. Without the habit of accelerating under pressure, you maintain clarity even in demanding situations. There is appreciation for simple routines. Repetition becomes soothing rather than boring because you are present for it. You notice that many fears were tied to imagined deadlines that did not truly exist. Releasing them reduces anxiety. Relationships with loved ones deepen because you give them your full attention instead of dividing it between now and what comes next. There is also a sense of alignment with nature. Seasons change gradually, growth happens slowly, cycles repeat without haste. Your pace begins to mirror this natural rhythm. You become more selective with commitments. Without rushing to say yes to everything, you choose what truly matters. There is joy in moving through the day without the constant feeling of being chased by time. You walk, speak, work, rest in a way that feels sustainable. Eventually, the urge to rush disappears almost completely. Urgency becomes reserved for situations that genuinely require it, not as a default mode of living. And in that slower rhythm, you discover something profound. Life was never meant to be a race. It was meant to be experienced. When resistance fades, time stops feeling like an opponent and starts feeling like a companion. You move forward not because you are being pushed, but because you are participating in the unfolding of each moment as it arrives, steady and unhurried, exactly at the pace that allows you to truly live it. As life slowed into a natural rhythm and the urge to rush quietly disappeared, another pattern became easier to see, the habit of treating every feeling as a signal to act. When you were moving fast, emotions felt urgent, almost like commands that had to be obeyed immediately. But in the calmer pace you had begun to live in, feelings rose and fell without forcing movement. You started to notice that emotions were not instructions. They were experiences passing through. And in that realization, restraint stopped feeling like suppression and started feeling like wisdom. A surprising calm appears the first time you allow a feeling to exist without reacting to it. Anger rises, but you do not speak from it. Sadness surfaces, but you do not rush to escape it. Anxiety appears, but you do not immediately search for reassurance. The feeling moves through you like weather instead of becoming the center of your actions. You begin to see how much damage came from reacting in the heat of emotion. Words spoken too quickly, decisions made too impulsively, actions driven by temporary states that faded soon after. Allowing feelings to settle before responding prevents unnecessary consequences. There is strength in restraint that feels different from suppression. Suppression pushes emotions down and stores them for later. Acceptance allows them to be felt fully while choosing not to act blindly. This distinction creates emotional maturity. You also discover that feelings often carry information rather than demands. Fear may signal uncertainty, not danger. Anger may point to hurt rather than injustice. Sadness may indicate loss rather than weakness. When you listen without reacting, the message becomes clearer. Relationships improve because you stop projecting raw emotion onto others. Instead of accusing, you communicate calmly. Instead of withdrawing impulsively, you stay present long enough to understand what is happening. There is freedom in not needing to fix every uncomfortable feeling. Some emotions resolve on their own when given space. Trying to control them often prolongs them. You start trusting your ability to tolerate discomfort. This trust reduces the urgency to escape through distraction, avoidance, or impulsive behavior. Self-respect grows because you act according to values rather than moods. You become someone who chooses responses carefully instead of someone driven by emotional waves. You also become less afraid of intense feelings. Knowing they do not control your actions makes them less threatening. They become part of the human experience rather than something to eliminate. Patience develops naturally. You allow time for clarity to emerge before making decisions. This patience prevents regret. There is also compassion for yourself when difficult emotions appear. Instead of criticizing yourself for feeling a certain way, you acknowledge it without judgment. You notice how much emotional reactivity once drained your energy. By conserving that energy, you feel more stable throughout the day. Your perception sharpens because you are not blinded by immediate reactions. You see situations more objectively, which leads to wiser choices. There is humility in recognizing that feelings are not always accurate reflections of reality. They are influenced by past experiences, stress, and expectations. You become more trustworthy to others because they know you will not react unpredictably. Your steadiness creates a sense of safety in relationships. You also learn that silence can be powerful. Not every emotion needs to be expressed instantly. Sometimes quiet reflection reveals a better way to communicate. Confidence stabilizes because it is not shaken by emotional fluctuations. You remain grounded even when feelings intensify. There is gratitude for the ability to experience emotions without being controlled by them. This ability feels like freedom. You also become more aware of how others are feeling, not to react, but to understand. Empathy deepens when you are not overwhelmed by your own responses. Stress decreases because you are not amplifying emotions through impulsive action. Calm responses prevent escalation. You start recognizing patterns in your emotional life. Certain triggers become familiar, allowing you to prepare rather than react. There is also joy in positive emotions that are not rushed into expression. You savor happiness quietly instead of chasing it outward. You learn that restraint does not diminish authenticity. It refines it. Your actions reflect your true intentions rather than temporary impulses. There is wisdom in choosing when to speak and when to wait. Timing becomes as important as content. You also become less reactive to external negativity. Other people's emotions do not dictate yours because you maintain inner stability. There is courage in allowing vulnerability without immediately defending against it. Openness replaces guardedness. Your inner world becomes more spacious because emotions are not crowding each other out. Each feeling has room to be acknowledged and released. Eventually, restraint feels natural rather than forced. You respond thoughtfully without needing to remind yourself to pause, and in that thoughtful response, you discover a deeper form of freedom. The freedom to feel everything without being pushed into action. The freedom to remain calm in the presence of intensity. The freedom to live from awareness instead of impulse. Emotions continue to move through you, but they no longer control the direction of your life. They become part of your experience, not the author of it. As you learned that not every feeling required action, your inner world became quieter. Without constant reactions pulling your attention outward, something unexpected happened. Awareness began to gather itself again. For a long time, your attention had been scattered across emotions, worries, memories, and predictions, stretched thin by resistance to whatever was happening. But when acceptance replaced resistance, that scattered awareness started returning, as if it had finally been called home. You realized how rarely you had truly been here, fully present, fully aware, fully alive in the moment that was actually unfolding. A subtle sadness appears when you recognize how much of life was lived in fragments. Even during important moments, part of your mind was somewhere else, replaying the past, rehearsing the future, resisting the present. This fragmentation made life feel thin, as if experiences were passing through you instead of being lived by you. Seeing this clearly creates a quiet determination to come back. There is relief in feeling attention settle into the body again. Sensations that were previously ignored become noticeable. The rhythm of breathing, the weight of your hands, the contact of your feet with the ground. These simple signals anchor you in reality more effectively than any thought. You start noticing how resistance had constantly pulled your focus away from what was happening. When something unpleasant occurred, the mind rushed to escape it. When something pleasant appeared, the mind rushed to hold on to it. In both cases, attention left the moment itself. Acceptance allows experiences to unfold without interference. You observe discomfort without amplifying it, joy without clinging to it, neutrality without trying to fill it. This observation stabilizes awareness. Your senses sharpen because attention is no longer divided. Sounds carry depth. Colors feel vivid, textures become rich with detail. Ordinary experiences regain intensity simply because you are fully present for them. Time feels different. Moments stretch instead of slipping away unnoticed. A single conversation or walk can feel complete because it is experienced fully rather than partially. You also become more attuned to your thoughts without being consumed by them. Instead of drifting into mental stories, you notice when thinking begins and gently return to what is real. There is calm in realizing that the present moment does not demand perfection. It simply asks for attention. You do not need to improve it or escape it to find peace within it. Relationships deepen because you are truly there. Listening becomes an act of presence rather than preparation for response. People feel the difference immediately. Stress decreases because your mind is not juggling multiple timelines. Attention resting in one place reduces overload. You begin to trust that the present moment contains enough. You do not need constant stimulation or distraction to feel alive. There is also a sense of intimacy with life. Being present creates a closeness to experience that was previously hidden by mental distance. Your memory improves because experiences are actually registered instead of skimmed over. You remember details because you were there for them. You notice beauty in ordinary scenes, light on a wall, the sound of wind, the rhythm of footsteps. These moments were always there, waiting for your attention. There is humility in recognizing how much you missed while living in resistance. This humility motivates gentleness toward yourself rather than regret. Creativity increases because awareness is available for inspiration. Ideas surface naturally when the mind is not crowded. You also become more patient. Presence dissolves the urgency that comes from living in the future. Decision-making improves because clarity emerges when attention is not fragmented. You see options more clearly. There is courage in staying with difficult moments instead of escaping them. This courage builds resilience. Your sense of self becomes less tied to thoughts and more grounded in awareness itself. You experience being rather than constant becoming. There is gratitude for the simplicity of breathing, seeing, hearing, touching, experiences that require nothing but presence. You become less dependent on external circumstances for peace. The present moment is always accessible, regardless of situation. There is also forgiveness for yourself for losing this connection in the past. Distraction was not failure, it was conditioning. You notice how presence transforms even routine tasks into meaningful experiences. Cooking, cleaning, walking, all become opportunities to be alive. Joy becomes quieter but deeper, not tied to excitement but to connection with reality. You also become more aware of when attention drifts and gently bring it back without judgment. This return itself becomes a form of peace. Eventually, presence stops feeling like an effort and becomes your natural state. Resistance no longer fragments awareness because acceptance holds it together, and in that gathered awareness, you discover something simple yet profound. Life was never elsewhere. It was always here, waiting for your attention. The present moment is not just a point in time, it is the only place where experience actually happens. When you stop resisting and allow attention to rest there, you do not escape life. You finally enter it fully, without distance, without fragmentation, without the quiet feeling of missing something that was always right in front of you. As your attention returned fully to the present moment, life stopped feeling like something you were constantly chasing or escaping. You began to experience events as they unfolded, without the filters of resistance or distraction. In that clear awareness, loss appeared differently than before. It was no longer just a painful interruption or something to interpret as unfair. Seen from presence, loss revealed itself as movement, a shift in form, a change in direction, a transition rather than a punishment. This realization did not erase grief, but it softened the sharp edge of confusion around it. A deep ache surfaces when something meaningful leaves your life. Whether it is a person, a role, a dream, or a version of yourself, the absence feels heavy because attachment created familiarity. When presence is strong, you notice that the pain is not only about what is gone, but also about the sudden change in the pattern you are used to living in. You begin to see that loss disrupts identity as much as circumstance. Without the familiar structure, you feel disoriented, as if part of you has disappeared. Understanding this removes the belief that grief is weakness. It becomes a natural response to change. There is clarity in recognizing that nothing in life remains fixed. Everything moves, evolves, transforms. Relationships shift, bodies age, environments change. Loss is not an exception to life's pattern. It is part of the pattern itself. You also realize that interpreting loss as punishment intensifies suffering. When you ask why this happened to me, the mind searches for blame, creating unnecessary pain. Seeing loss as movement removes the need for explanation. Grief becomes less isolating when you understand it as a shared human experience. Everyone encounters transitions that feel like endings. This awareness fosters compassion for yourself and others. There is a quiet acceptance in allowing sadness to exist without trying to shorten it. Emotions move at their own pace, just like everything else in life. Memories begin to change as well. Instead of triggering sharp pain, they gradually carry warmth alongside sorrow. The relationship with what was lost evolves. You notice that loss often opens space for new experiences, even if that space initially feels empty. Growth requires room to unfold, and loss creates that room. There is also a deeper appreciation for what remains. Presence highlights the value of what is still here, reducing the tendency to overlook it. Your perception of time shifts. Instead of feeling that something was taken away permanently, you see that it existed fully while it was here. The experience itself cannot be erased. Forgiveness sometimes arises naturally, not because you forced it, but because understanding replaced resentment. You become more attentive to the impermanence of everything. This awareness increases gratitude rather than fear. There is humility in recognizing that you cannot hold on to life indefinitely. Letting go becomes an act of respect for the natural flow of existence. You also develop resilience. Each experience of loss teaches you that you can endure change without losing your core. Connection to others deepens because shared vulnerability creates authenticity. People relate to you not through perfection, but through honesty. There is a quiet courage in continuing to love despite knowing that nothing lasts forever. Love becomes more precious because of its fragility. Your sense of self becomes less tied to external circumstances. You discover stability within rather than in what surrounds you. You notice how often loss brings clarity about what truly matters. Priorities shift toward meaning rather than distraction. There is also relief in releasing the expectation that life should be free of pain. Accepting discomfort reduces its intensity. You begin to trust that transitions carry lessons, even if they are not immediately visible. Growth sometimes occurs beneath awareness. Hope returns in a quieter form, not as denial of loss, but as confidence that life continues to unfold. You become more present with others who are grieving, offering presence instead of solutions. Silence often communicates more than words. There is appreciation for the resilience of the human heart, its ability to heal while still remembering. You also notice that loss reshapes your perspective, making you more sensitive to beauty and connection. Peace emerges when you stop resisting the reality of change. You allow life to move without interpreting every shift as injustice. Eventually, grief transforms into a form of wisdom. You carry the experience as understanding rather than pain. And in that understanding, you see that nothing truly disappears. It changes form, influence, and place in your life. What was once external becomes internal: memories, lessons, strength, compassion. Life continues to move, and you move with it, not because you have forgotten what was lost, but because you have accepted that movement is the nature of existence itself. Loss no longer feels like a punishment delivered by life, but like a doorway that led you into a deeper awareness of what it means to be human, to love, to change, and to keep living even when parts of your story have closed. As loss stopped feeling like punishment and began to reveal itself as movement, another quiet shift unfolded inside you. The harsh voice that once judged every mistake, every weakness, every moment of vulnerability started losing its intensity. When you were no longer fighting reality or blaming yourself for what could not be changed, the inner critic had less to attack. It had been fueled by resistance, by the belief that life and you should have been different. When acceptance took root, that voice no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like an old habit that no longer matched who you were becoming. A heavy silence appears when the constant self-judgment fades. At first, it feels unfamiliar because you were used to measuring yourself relentlessly. Without that pressure, you begin to sense how much energy had been spent criticizing rather than understanding yourself. You start noticing how the inner critic developed as a form of protection. It tried to prevent mistakes by punishing you in advance, believing harshness would keep you safe. Recognizing this softens your relationship with it. Instead of fighting it, you see it as something that once served a purpose, but no longer needs to dominate. There is relief in realizing that imperfection does not require condemnation. You allow yourself to be human, capable of error, learning, growth. This acceptance reduces shame, which had been one of the critic's strongest tools. Your self-talk changes. Instead of automatic negativity, there is curiosity. You ask what happened rather than declaring that you failed. This shift transforms mistakes into opportunities for understanding. Compassion begins to replace judgment. You treat yourself with the same patience you would offer someone you care about. This compassion is not indulgence, it is honesty without cruelty. You also become less afraid of trying new things. The critic often discouraged action by predicting failure. Without its dominance, curiosity and courage reappear. There is calm in acknowledging limits without interpreting them as flaws. You recognize where you need rest, support, or time, without labeling yourself as weak. Relationships improve because you are not projecting self-judgment onto others. When you are gentler with yourself, you naturally become gentler with people around you. You start noticing how the critic thrived on comparison and unrealistic expectations. Acceptance dissolves these standards, making room for realistic growth. Confidence stabilizes because it is no longer dependent on perfection. You trust your ability to navigate life even when you make mistakes. There is freedom in allowing your past to exist without constant reinterpretation. You stop using old experiences as evidence against yourself. Your body reflects this change. Tension caused by chronic self-criticism decreases, leading to relaxation and better health. You also become more open to feedback because it no longer feels like confirmation of inadequacy. You can learn without feeling attacked. There is gratitude for the resilience that carried you through difficult times, even when you did not handle everything perfectly. You begin to notice how self-judgment had distorted your perception of success. Achievements felt insufficient because the critic minimized them. Without it, satisfaction becomes possible. You also allow yourself to enjoy positive experiences without questioning whether you deserve them. Joy feels natural rather than conditional. Patience grows because you understand that growth takes time. You stop rushing improvement to silence the critic. There is humility in accepting that everyone struggles internally, even if it is not visible. This awareness reduces isolation. You become more authentic because you are not hiding flaws to avoid criticism. Transparency replaces pretense. There is also courage in admitting uncertainty. Not knowing becomes an invitation to learn rather than proof of inadequacy. Your creativity expands because fear of judgment no longer restricts expression. You explore ideas freely. You notice how much lighter life feels when you are not carrying constant self-blame. Energy becomes available for living rather than defending yourself internally. Forgiveness toward yourself deepens. You release the belief that you must keep punishing yourself to atone for past mistakes. There is appreciation for progress, even when it is gradual. You celebrate movement rather than demanding perfection. You also become more resilient to external criticism because your self-worth is no longer dependent on others' opinions. There is peace in accepting that you will never be flawless, and that this is not a problem to solve. You start trusting your intentions rather than doubting them automatically. This trust strengthens decision-making. There is joy in recognizing your own humanity, the blend of strength and vulnerability that makes you real. Eventually, the inner critic becomes a faint voice rather than a dominating presence. It may still appear, but it no longer defines your identity, and in that quiet, you discover a deeper relationship with yourself. One based on understanding instead of judgment, patience instead of pressure, acceptance instead of resistance. You move through life without needing to prove your worth constantly because you no longer doubt that it exists. The softness that replaces the critic is not weakness. It is strength without hostility, clarity without harshness, a steady kindness toward yourself that allows you to grow without fear. As the inner critic softened and your relationship with yourself became less hostile, silence began to change its meaning. It was no longer filled with accusations, regrets, or anxious thoughts waiting to be heard. The quiet that once felt uncomfortable now felt spacious, almost protective. Without the constant noise of self-judgment, being alone with your own mind stopped feeling like exposure and started feeling like shelter. What used to feel empty slowly revealed itself as peaceful. A subtle uneasiness appears the first time you sit in silence without trying to escape it. For a long time, noise had been a distraction from inner discomfort. Music, conversations, scrolling, constant activity, all ways to avoid facing yourself. When those distractions fade, you meet your own presence directly. At first, this meeting can feel unfamiliar. You realize how rarely you allowed yourself to simply exist without stimulation. But as acceptance deepens, the discomfort softens. Silence stops feeling like something to endure and becomes something to rest in. You begin to notice how peaceful your environment actually is when it is not filled with unnecessary noise. The absence of sound allows subtle details to emerge. Distant hums, natural rhythms, the quiet movement of life around you. Your mind also starts to slow down. Without external input to react to, thoughts lose momentum. They appear, pass, and fade without dominating your attention. There is relief in not needing to perform for anyone. Solitude removes the pressure to maintain roles or identities. You can simply be without explanation. You discover that silence holds clarity. Decisions become easier when not influenced by constant opinions or distractions. Your own understanding becomes more accessible. Loneliness transforms into solitude, a state that feels chosen rather than imposed. You are alone without feeling abandoned. Creativity often emerges in these quiet moments. Ideas surface naturally when the mind is not crowded. You also become more aware of your emotional state. Without noise masking it, you notice subtle shifts in mood and energy, allowing you to respond with care. There is a sense of safety in realizing that you can be with yourself without discomfort. This safety strengthens independence. Relationships improve because you no longer seek constant interaction to avoid silence. You connect with others from desire rather than need. You start appreciating simple activities done quietly: reading, walking, breathing, watching light change throughout the day. These moments feel complete without requiring anything extra. Your nervous system calms because silence signals that there is no immediate threat. Rest becomes deeper. You also notice how many fears were amplified by noise and distraction. In quiet, they lose intensity because you observe them without escalation. Self-trust grows because you rely on your own awareness rather than external reassurance. There is humility in recognizing that life continues peacefully even when you are not actively engaging with it. You are part of a larger stillness. You become more attentive to the silence in conversations, understanding that pauses carry meaning rather than awkwardness. Gratitude arises for the ability to experience peace without needing conditions to create it. You also become less reactive to chaos in the outside world because you know you can return to this inner refuge. Patience develops because silence teaches you to wait without agitation. Your sense of identity stabilizes because it is not dependent on constant interaction or validation. You start recognizing silence as a form of nourishment, restoring energy depleted by constant stimulation. There is courage in choosing solitude when needed, even in a culture that fears being alone. You notice how deeply you can think when uninterrupted, leading to insights that were previously hidden. There is also comfort in knowing that silence is always available, no matter where you are. Eventually, quiet becomes something you seek rather than avoid. It feels like returning home after being away for too long, and in that quiet, you discover that you were never empty. The space was always filled with presence, awareness, and calm waiting to be noticed. Solitude stops feeling like absence and becomes refuge, a place where you can rest, reflect, and reconnect with the steady core of yourself that does not depend on noise to feel alive. As silence became a refuge instead of something to escape, you began to notice another quiet shift. Peace was no longer tied to special moments, achievements, or bursts of pleasure. It appeared in the absence of struggle, in the simple lack of inner conflict. Sitting alone without noise, without pressure, without needing anything to change, you felt a calm that did not come from excitement or satisfaction. It came from the end of argument, the end of fighting reality, yourself, or the moment you were in. This calm was steady, not dramatic, and that is what made it powerful. A subtle realization surfaces when you see how much of your life was spent chasing happiness, as if it was something you had to acquire. You believed peace would arrive after success, after recognition, after everything finally made sense. But even when pleasant experiences occurred, they faded quickly, leaving the mind searching for the next one. Pleasure alone was never stable enough to hold you. You begin to understand that peace is not built from what you gain, but from what you stop resisting. When the inner dialogue arguing with life quiets down, a natural ease fills the space. Nothing extra needs to happen for this ease to exist. There is relief in recognizing that happiness does not require constant stimulation. Without needing excitement to feel alive, ordinary moments become sufficient. A quiet afternoon, a simple meal, a conversation without tension. These experiences carry a calm joy that does not demand intensity. You also notice how arguments inside your mind created most of your suffering. Disputes with the past, complaints about the present, fears about the future. When these internal battles pause, peace appears without effort. Pleasure becomes something you can enjoy without depending on it. You appreciate good experiences while knowing that their absence does not remove your stability. There is humility in accepting that life will include discomfort, confusion, and imperfection. Peace remains because it is not dependent on ideal conditions. Your expectations soften. You stop demanding that every day feel meaningful or exciting. Contentment grows in the background of ordinary life. You start noticing how calm feels different from excitement. Excitement is sharp and temporary. Calm is quiet and enduring. Learning to value calm changes your definition of happiness. Relationships improve because you are not seeking constant emotional highs. You appreciate steady connection rather than dramatic moments. There is also freedom from the fear of boredom. Without needing constant pleasure, stillness feels peaceful rather than empty. You begin to trust that peace can coexist with sadness, uncertainty, or difficulty. It is not the absence of emotion, but the absence of resistance to emotion. Gratitude deepens because you notice the simple absence of conflict. When nothing is wrong, that itself feels meaningful. You also become less reactive to disappointment. When expectations are not rigid, setbacks do not feel catastrophic. Your sense of worth becomes less tied to achievement. You recognize that being at peace is not something you earn, it is something you allow. There is patience in waiting for things to unfold without forcing them. Time feels less like an adversary. You start appreciating the quiet satisfaction of alignment, living in a way that does not create inner conflict. There is also compassion for others who are still chasing pleasure as a substitute for peace. You understand the exhaustion behind that pursuit. Your decisions become clearer because they are not driven by the need to escape discomfort or secure happiness. You notice how much energy becomes available when you are not constantly seeking more. Simplicity becomes appealing. There is joy in small comforts that were previously overlooked. Warmth, light, rest, gentle conversation. You also become more resilient to emotional ups and downs. Stability does not disappear when circumstances change. There is wisdom in recognizing that pleasure can distract from deeper fulfillment if relied on too heavily. Your mind becomes quieter because it is not constantly calculating how to maximize happiness. You begin to feel at home in your own life rather than waiting for something better to arrive. There is also a sense of maturity in accepting that peace is subtle. It does not announce itself, it simply remains. You become less influenced by external pressure to appear happy or successful. Authentic calm replaces performance. Trust in life deepens because you see that peace can exist even when things are uncertain. Eventually, the pursuit of happiness transforms into the practice of acceptance. You stop chasing emotional highs and start valuing stability. And in that stability, you discover a new definition of happiness. not as a peak experience, not as constant pleasure, but as the quiet absence of inner conflict. A state where nothing needs to be different for you to feel at ease. Life continues with its changes, challenges and joys, but you meet it without argument, without the constant demand that it satisfy you. Peace becomes your baseline, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fighting what is. As peace revealed itself as the absence of inner argument rather than the presence of constant pleasure, another hidden belief began to lose its power, the idea that calm had to be earned. For so long, relaxation felt like a reward reserved for after productivity, after responsibility, after proving your worth. Even in moments of rest, there was often a quiet guilt whispering that you had not done enough yet. But once acceptance replaced resistance, you started to see how unnecessary that struggle had been. Calm was not something to deserve, it was something you had been postponing. A quiet tension becomes visible when you realize how difficult it once was to simply stop. Even when there was nothing urgent to do, your mind searched for tasks, improvements, obligations. Stillness felt uncomfortable because it challenged the belief that your value depended on constant effort. You begin to see how deeply this belief was conditioned. Messages about productivity, success, and worth created the idea that rest must be justified. Without realizing it, you treated relaxation as something that required permission. There is relief in understanding that your body and mind were never meant to operate without pause. Rest is not laziness, it is restoration. Without it, clarity fades and exhaustion becomes normal. You also notice how guilt had contaminated moments that could have been peaceful. Instead of enjoying quiet time, you evaluated whether you had earned it. Acceptance dissolves that evaluation. Calm becomes accessible at any moment, not just after achievement. You allow yourself to breathe deeply without needing a reason. Your relationship with work changes as well. Effort becomes sustainable because it is balanced with recovery. You stop pushing beyond your limits to prove endurance. There is compassion for the part of you that believed rest was dangerous or unproductive. That belief was an attempt to stay safe in a demanding world. You start noticing how much clearer your thinking becomes when you allow pauses. Solutions often appear during rest rather than during intense effort. Relationships benefit because you are more present when you are not exhausted. Energy is available for connection. You also become less reactive to pressure from others. When you trust your need for calm, external expectations lose some influence. Sleep improves because you are not carrying guilt into it. Rest feels natural instead of forced. There is humility in recognizing that you do not have to carry everything alone. Accepting help becomes easier. You begin to enjoy simple forms of relaxation, sitting quietly, taking a walk, watching the sky change. These moments feel meaningful rather than indulgent. Your self-worth stabilizes because it is no longer tied to productivity. You value yourself for being, not only for doing. There is courage in setting boundaries that protect your energy. You decline commitments that would push you beyond balance. You also become more attentive to signs of fatigue before they become overwhelming. Listening to your body becomes an act of respect. There is gratitude for the ability to slow down in a world that often glorifies speed. You start noticing how rest enhances creativity and insight. The mind reorganizes itself when given space. There is also freedom from the fear of wasting time. Time spent restoring yourself is not lost. It is invested in clarity and well-being. You become more patient because urgency no longer defines your pace. You trust that things can unfold without constant pressure. Your mood stabilizes because you are not operating from depletion. Calm becomes your baseline. You also become more compassionate toward others who are struggling with exhaustion. You recognize the cost of constant striving. There is joy in knowing that peace is available even on ordinary days without special accomplishments. You stop postponing happiness until after everything is completed. Life is lived alongside responsibilities, not after them. Your perception of success changes. Balance and well-being become as valuable as achievement. There is also trust in your ability to return to calm even after stressful periods. You know rest will restore you. Eventually, the need to justify relaxation disappears. You rest because it is part of being alive, not because you have earned it. And in that acceptance, you discover a deeper kindness toward yourself. The understanding that calm was never a prize at the end of effort. It was a foundation you had overlooked, always available, waiting for you to stop postponing it. Life continues with its demands and responsibilities, but you meet them from a place of steadiness rather than exhaustion, knowing that peace does not have to be earned. It only has to be allowed. As the pressure to earn rest faded and calm became something you allowed instead of postponed, a deeper realization began to take shape. Much of your exhaustion had come from trying to control every outcome, every feeling, every direction life might take. You were not just living, you were managing, adjusting, predicting, forcing. When acceptance softened that grip, life stopped feeling like something you had to dominate and started feeling like something you could move with. The tension of control gave way to a quieter role, participation. A strange lightness appears when you stop treating life like a problem to solve. For years, you believed that if you planned enough, anticipated enough, pushed enough, you could eliminate uncertainty. But the more you tried, the more resistance you felt. Letting go of that constant management reveals how much energy had been locked inside effort. You begin to notice that life is already in motion without your supervision. Days unfold, seasons change, people grow, circumstances shift. You are part of that movement, not the force behind it. There is relief in realizing that not everything depends on you. Responsibility becomes balanced instead of overwhelming. You still act where you can, but you no longer carry what is beyond your influence. You start listening more to situations, to people, to your own intuition. Participation requires awareness, not domination. You respond instead of imposing. Flexibility replaces rigidity. When plans change, you adjust rather than resist. Adaptation becomes a strength rather than a failure of control. You also discover how much creativity exists in cooperation. When you work with circumstances instead of against them, unexpected opportunities appear. There is humility in recognizing that life is larger than your preferences. Events are not personal obstacles. They are part of a broader flow. Your relationships deepen because you stop trying to control others' reactions or choices. You allow people to be themselves while remaining present. There is patience in letting situations develop before acting. You trust timing instead of forcing outcomes prematurely. You become more attentive to signals that guide action, subtle cues that were missed when you were focused only on your agenda. There is courage in stepping into uncertainty without needing guarantees. Participation involves engagement without absolute control. You also notice how much tension disappears from your body when you are not constantly bracing for what might go wrong. Your sense of identity shifts from someone who must direct everything to someone who can collaborate with life itself. There is curiosity about what might unfold rather than fear of losing control. The unknown becomes interesting instead of threatening. You begin to appreciate spontaneity. Moments that could not have been planned but become meaningful experiences. There is also resilience in knowing that you can adjust to change because you are not attached to rigid expectations. You trust your ability to respond wisely rather than trying to prevent every challenge. Your decisions become more grounded because they are based on present reality rather than imagined scenarios. There is peace in accepting that some paths reveal themselves only after you start walking them. You stop measuring progress solely by how closely life matches your plans. Growth becomes the ability to navigate, not to predict. There is gratitude for the support that exists around you, people, circumstances, opportunities that you do not have to create alone. You also become more present because participation requires attention to what is happening now, not only to what might happen next. There is joy in contributing to life instead of controlling it. You influence without dominating. You notice how cooperation with reality produces outcomes that feel natural rather than forced. There is also trust that setbacks can redirect you towards something valuable, even if it is not immediately visible. You begin to experience life as a conversation rather than a command. You offer effort, and reality responds in its own way. Eventually, the need to control every detail fades into a quiet confidence that you can move with whatever arises. And in that movement, you discover a new way of living, not as someone struggling to bend life to your will, but as someone engaged in a shared unfolding. You act, adapt, learn, and grow without the constant pressure to dominate outcomes. Life becomes less like a battlefield and more like a current you can navigate. You are no longer exhausted from trying to hold everything together because you are not holding it alone. You are participating in something already in motion, trusting that cooperation creates a deeper kind of strength than control ever could. As you stopped trying to control life and began participating in it, another struggle slowly came into focus. The quiet war you had been fighting inside yourself. Even when you learned to move with circumstances, you still resisted what you felt. Certain emotions were labeled as weakness, others as danger, some as things to hide or eliminate as quickly as possible. But the same acceptance that softened your grip on life now started softening your resistance toward your own inner world. You realized that emotions were not obstacles to overcome, but movements to understand. When you stopped treating them as enemies, they stopped attacking. A tight pressure surfaces when you notice how quickly you used to suppress feelings the moment they appeared. Sadness was pushed down, anger was restrained until it leaked out in other ways, fear was denied. This constant suppression created tension that never fully disappeared. You begin to see that emotions were not trying to harm you. They were responses to experiences, signals from the mind and body indicating that something mattered. Ignoring them did not remove their influence, it only buried it. There is relief in allowing a feeling to exist without immediately reacting to it. You let it move through you without turning it into a problem to solve. You start noticing how emotions have a natural lifespan when not resisted. They rise, peak, and fade like waves returning to still water. Your body relaxes because it is no longer holding back energy associated with suppressed feelings. Breathing becomes deeper, posture less tense. There is compassion for yourself in moments of vulnerability. Instead of judging your reactions, you acknowledge them as part of being human. You also become more honest with yourself. Pretending to be unaffected required effort. Authenticity feels lighter. Fear becomes easier to face because you are not fighting the sensation itself. You listen to what it is pointing toward. Anger transforms from something explosive into something informative. It highlights boundaries that may need attention. Sadness deepens your capacity for empathy. By allowing it, you become more sensitive to the experiences of others. Joy becomes more genuine because it is no longer contrasted against suppressed negativity. All emotions exist within the same acceptance. You start recognizing triggers without blaming yourself for them. Awareness replaces self-criticism. There is patience in letting emotions unfold before deciding how to respond. Immediate reaction is no longer necessary. You also notice that feelings often change once acknowledged. Recognition reduces intensity. Your relationships benefit because you express emotions calmly instead of letting them accumulate until they overwhelm you. There is courage in sharing vulnerability with people you trust, knowing it does not diminish your strength. You begin to see that emotional pain often came from resisting feelings rather than from the feelings themselves. There is also clarity in distinguishing between emotion and action. Feeling something does not require acting on it impulsively. You trust that even intense emotions will pass, reducing fear of being consumed by them. Your emotional range expands because acceptance allows you to experience life fully instead of selectively. There is wisdom in understanding that emotions carry information about your needs, values, and boundaries. You also become less reactive to others' emotions because you are comfortable with your own. There is peace in moments of neutrality when no strong emotion dominates. You no longer search for stimulation. You stop labeling emotions as positive or negative and start seeing them as natural variations in experience. There is gratitude for the resilience that allowed you to survive difficult feelings in the past. You notice how much energy returns when you are not fighting your inner state. Eventually, emotions feel less like storms and more like weather, temporary conditions that pass through a stable sky. And in that stability, you discover a deeper trust in yourself. You no longer fear what you feel because you know you can hold it without being overwhelmed. Acceptance transforms your inner world from a battlefield into a landscape you can move through with awareness and care. Emotions come and go, leaving insight instead of damage because they are allowed to complete their natural course. You are not at war with yourself anymore. You are listening, learning, and living with a quiet confidence that nothing inside you needs to be defeated in order for you to be at peace. As emotions stopped feeling like enemies and began revealing themselves as passing signals, a deeper realization quietly emerged. For so long, you believed healing would begin later, when life became easier, when people understood you, when circumstances finally aligned with your hopes. You postponed peace, convincing yourself that you needed a different environment before you could feel better. But acceptance showed you something unexpected. The moment you stopped resisting what was already here, healing had already begun. Nothing outside you needed to change for that process to start. A heavy pause appears when you recognize how much time was spent waiting for conditions to improve before allowing yourself relief. You told yourself you would rest after things settled, forgive after apologies came, move forward after closure arrived. Meanwhile, the present moment was left unused, even though it was the only place where healing could actually occur. You begin to see how this waiting created its own suffering. Life became suspended between what was and what you hoped it would be. Acceptance collapses that gap, bringing your attention back to where your influence truly exists. There is relief in understanding that healing is not an event, but a gradual shift in how you relate to experience. It does not require perfect timing or special preparation. It begins with allowing what you feel and where you are. You also notice how much strength was already present within you. Surviving difficult moments required resilience you did not always acknowledge. Recognizing that strength becomes part of healing itself, there is compassion for the version of you that kept postponing peace because it believed suffering was necessary or unavoidable. You understand that it was trying to protect you in the only way it knew. You start noticing small changes, moments of calm where there used to be tension, clarity where confusion once dominated. These subtle shifts confirm that healing is happening even without dramatic transformation. Your body begins to relax because it no longer feels trapped in constant anticipation of improvement. The nervous system settles when it realizes safety is not dependent on external conditions. There is freedom in forgiving yourself for not healing faster. Growth unfolds at its own pace, and acceptance allows that pace to be enough. You become more attentive to what supports your well-being in the present rather than focusing solely on future solutions. Simple actions like rest, connection, and honest reflection gain importance. There is humility in acknowledging that you do not need to understand everything before moving forward. Healing often happens beyond conscious analysis. You also discover that acceptance does not mean approving of what happened. It means no longer demanding that reality be rewritten before you allow yourself peace. Grief softens when you stop waiting for the past to change. You carry memories without being anchored to them. There is trust in your ability to continue healing even when setbacks occur. Progress is not erased by temporary difficulty. You start noticing opportunities for growth hidden within ordinary experiences. Every moment becomes part of the process rather than an obstacle. There is courage in facing unresolved feelings without postponing them. Avoidance loses its appeal when you realize healing requires presence. You also become less dependent on validation from others. Your recovery does not require universal understanding. There is gratitude for the present moment as a place where change is always possible, regardless of circumstances. You notice how your perspective shifts from asking when healing will happen to recognizing that it is already underway. There is patience with yourself during difficult days, knowing they are part of a larger movement toward wholeness. You also begin to experience hope not as expectation, but as quiet confidence that growth continues even when invisible. There is relief in releasing the belief that you must fix everything before feeling better. Improvement and peace can coexist. You become more open to support because you no longer feel you must wait until you are stronger to accept help. There is stability in knowing that your inner environment can become peaceful even if the outer one remains unpredictable. You also discover that healing is not linear. It moves in cycles, revisiting old pain with new understanding. There is joy in recognizing moments of genuine ease that would have been dismissed before. Small victories matter. Eventually, the need to delay peace dissolves completely. You stop measuring readiness and simply allow yourself to move forward from where you stand. And in that acceptance, you realize that healing was never locked behind better circumstances. It was waiting behind resistance, ready to unfold the moment you stopped arguing with reality. Life may still contain uncertainty, unfinished stories, and unresolved questions, but you no longer require everything to align before allowing yourself to feel whole. Peace begins now, not later, because now is the only place where change can truly begin. As you realize that healing did not require better circumstances to begin, another perspective quietly unfolded. The belief that life had been working against you started to loosen. Many painful experiences once felt personal, as if the world had singled you out for difficulty. But acceptance revealed something different. Events were not attacks, not punishments, not evidence of unfair treatment. They were movements within a larger system that did not revolve around you at all. Life was not against you. It was simply unfolding without guarantees, without control, without personal intention. A heavy story begins to fade when you stop interpreting everything through the lens of injustice. You notice how often the mind tried to make sense of pain by assigning blame to life itself. This narrative kept you locked in resentment because it assumed there was an opponent. You begin to see how much suffering came from personalization. When something went wrong, it felt targeted, as if it meant something about your worth or your fate. Letting go of that interpretation brings unexpected relief. There is calm in recognizing that many events occur due to countless factors beyond anyone's control. Timing, circumstance, other people's choices, randomness, forces that are not coordinated against you. You start noticing how neutral reality actually is. It does not favor or reject. It simply moves according to causes and conditions. There is humility in accepting that you are part of a vast process rather than the center of it. This reduces the pressure to explain everything in personal terms. You also become less bitter about the past. When experiences are no longer seen as deliberate harm from life, resentment loses its foundation. There is compassion for others who are also navigating uncertainty without control. Everyone is moving through the same unpredictable environment. You begin to interpret challenges as situations to navigate rather than injustices to protest. Action replaces complaint. There is peace in releasing the expectation that life should follow a fair script. Reality was never designed to match human preferences. You also notice how much energy returns when you stop fighting an imaginary adversary. Life becomes something to engage with, not resist. Your perspective on success changes as well. Positive outcomes are appreciated without assuming they were earned through perfect control. There is patience in accepting that unpredictability is not failure, but part of existence. You become more attentive to what can be influenced in the present instead of dwelling on what cannot be changed. There is courage in facing uncertainty without interpreting it as hostility. You also discover gratitude for neutral moments that were previously overlooked because they did not fit the story of struggle. Relationships improve because you stop projecting frustration onto others. You see their actions as influenced by their own circumstances rather than as personal attacks. There is resilience in adapting to change rather than resisting it. Flexibility becomes a form of strength. You start trusting that meaning can be created even when events themselves are neutral. There is relief in realizing that you do not need to take everything personally. Not all outcomes are reflections of you. You also become more curious about life's unfolding because it is no longer framed as a battle to win. There is balance in accepting both pleasant and difficult experiences as parts of the same flow. You notice how fear decreases when you stop expecting hidden threats behind every challenge. There is wisdom in understanding that neutrality does not diminish the impact of experiences, it clarifies them. You begin to live with less defensiveness, open to what arises without assuming danger. There is appreciation for the unpredictability that also allows for unexpected joy. Eventually, the story of life as an opponent dissolves completely. You stop measuring events by how fair they seem and start observing how they move. And in that observation, you discover a profound shift. Life is not a force working against you, but a fluid process you are part of. It does not promise ease or difficulty, reward or punishment. It simply unfolds. Without the burden of seeing it as unfair, you meet each moment with openness rather than resistance. You navigate instead of defend, respond instead of resent, participate instead of withdraw. In this neutrality, there is freedom. The freedom to live without the constant belief that you must overcome life itself just to find peace. When you stop resisting reality, life does not suddenly become perfect, but the war inside you ends. The need to control everything softens. The fear of the future loses its grip. The past stops replaying like a wound that never closes. You begin to see that peace was never hiding somewhere else. It was buried under the tension of fighting what already is. Acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you clear. It returns your energy, your attention, your ability to live without constantly bracing for impact. And in that clarity, you discover something quiet but powerful. Nothing needed to change for you to begin feeling free. If something in this message reached you, don't scroll away silently. Leave a comment with one word that describes what you're ready to stop resisting. That single word might be the moment your mind finally lets go. And if you want more teachings that help you think clearly, live calmly, and move through life without unnecessary suffering, subscribe to the channel and become part of a space where peace is practiced, not just talked about.